A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, the UAW has a tentative agreement at Ford. What that means, we're going to break it down. We're also talking about Starbucks implicitly endorsing a boycott of its union stores because they oppose Israel's killing of civilians. Amazing. The APWU's president is calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number, and the line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We've also got a voicemail, and the line is open for texts throughout the week. You can call or text us throughout the week, and we might respond on the next show. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, tvlr.fm. You can sign up there to our newsletter, where we send Last Week in Southern Labor and Boss Watch in written form directly to your inbox, so that you know what workers and bosses in the South are up to every single week. We are also, of course, on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, folks, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program, make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate. You can buy our new merch at tvlr.fm/store, or you can go to patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then please do think about getting your local or state council or international union to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check it out.
Absolutely. Ben Boyd is in the chat from Local 2000, UAW Local 2000 at Ford. Welcome, Ben, and everybody else that's tuning in. We really appreciate your time. We're going to start off, as we typically do, with Last Week in Southern Labor. Last Week in Southern Labor is a segment where we talk about what workers were up to in the South in the last week, because workers don't get enough love in the media. We're always doing stuff, always winning elections, winning strikes, winning bargaining, and sometimes losing, and it's important for folks to understand what's going on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the new election filings for the last week. The employer filed for a union election after a majority of the 21 workers at Starbucks in Atlanta, Georgia showed support for unionization with Starbucks Workers United. 6 workers at Lincare Incorporated in Wheeling, West Virginia filed for a union election with the Teamsters, Chauffeurs, Warehousemen, and Helpers Local Local 67. 3 workers at Johnson Controls in Springfield, Missouri filed for a union election with the United Association of Journeymen and Apprentices of the Plumbing and Pipe Fitting Industry, Local 669. That's the UA's Road Sprinkler Fitters Local. 4 workers at CMI Management in Quantico Base, Virginia, filed for a union election with the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE, Local 99. 72 workers at Centerpoint Energy in Byram, Mississippi, filed for a union election with UA Local 619. 36 workers at Patriot Plumbing in Winchester, Kentucky, filed for a union election with UA Local 452. 14 firefighters at L3 Harris Technologies in Greenville, Texas, filed for a union election with the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, otherwise known as the UAW, Local 967. The employer filed for a union election after a majority of the 21 workers at a Starbucks in Denton, Texas, showed support for unionization with the Starbucks Workers United. 11 workers at Grant Makers for Effective Organizations in Washington, D.C. filed for a union election with the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, Local 1199. 11 security guards at Garda World Cash Services in North Charleston, South Carolina, filed for a union election with the Security, Police, and Fire Professionals of America, SPFPA International Union. Anti-union workers at Black Hawk Mining, LLC, Glancy Surface Mine in Wharton, West Virginia, filed a petition to decertify the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, Local 1503, as the union representing the 88 workers there. 2 workers at the FedEx office in Austin, Texas, filed for a union election with the Lone Star Labor Education Union. Never heard of them before. Anti-union workers at Valero Services in West Memphis, Arkansas, withdrew their petition to decertify the United Steelworkers International Union as the union representing the 7 workers there, so the USW will remain. 2 workers at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. withdrew their petition for a union election with the D.C. Nurses Association, as did 8 workers at L&W Supply Corporation in Karnes, Tennessee. They withdrew their petition for a union election with the Teamsters Local 519, and this happening only 1 week before the election was scheduled. 27 workers at Swissport Fueling in Fort Myers, Florida, withdrew their request to amend the bargaining unit there. And in election results, anti-union workers at Max Finkelstein, LLC in Winchester, Virginia, filed a petition to decertify the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union as the union representing the 500-plus warehouse employees and drivers there. And before getting to the election, the union filed a disclaimer of interest with the NLRB, in which it, quote, waives and disclaims any right to represent the employees. It seems like the union thought the election was heading to a pretty overwhelming no vote, but ashamed to see them surrender nevertheless. 6 workers at Given Glass and Glazing in South Charleston, West Virginia, voted to decertify the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, IUPAT, District 53, as the union representing them. And 81 workers at Pepsi Beverages North America in Collierville, Tennessee, voted to keep the Teamsters Local 667 as their union in a decertification election. 8 workers at Cisco Louisville in, you guessed it, Louisville, Tennessee, voted in favor of unionization.
Kentucky, you mean, right?
Louisville, Kentucky. Sorry. In Louisville, Kentucky, voted in favor of unionization with the General Drivers, Warehousemen, and Helpers Union, Local 89. 9 workers at SSM Health St. Louis University Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, voted in favor of unionization with SEIU Missouri, Kansas Division. 9 workers at Blue Sprocket Pressing in Harrisonburg, Virginia, voted in favor of unionization with the Teamsters Local 29. 329 workers at Lockheed Martin in Lexington, Kentucky, voted in favor of unionization, 156 to 133, with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW. That's a big win. Union rights for security officers won a runoff election after none of the 3 unions vying to represent 67 security guards at Centera Group in Washington, D.C. got a majority in the first round. held in August. 600 workers for the city of Richmond voted in favor of unionization with the Teamsters Local 322. This is the first time that any union has represented Richmond workers, and is the first time that they have held an election since collective bargaining became legal in Virginia in 2021. There's quite a few updates around strikes and bargaining. The NLRB found that the National Autobahn Society has violated labor law during negotiations with its union employees, represented by the Bird Union, CWA, by refusing to bargain over mandatory subjects of bargaining, by unilaterally imposing changes, by denying union members benefits given to non-union employees, and failing to disclose relevant financial information to the union. Negotiations have been going on for 18 months. Amazon Teamsters have extended their strike from California to Georgia last week, and Memphis soy protein production workers with the Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco Workers, and Grain Millers International Union, BCTGM, Local 390G, have been on strike since June. The 4,000 UAW members at Mack Trucks continue their strike, as do UAW members at GM and Stellantis. UAW members at Ford have a tentative agreement, and reports are that GM is now matching Ford's wage proposal, so we could be seeing tentative agreements coming at GM and potentially Stellantis soon. Shangri-La dispensary workers with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW Local 655 in Columbia, Missouri, are still on strike. They began in May. And Three Brothers coffee workers with UFCW Local 1995 in Nashville, Tennessee have been on strike since June. There's a few updates in policy, politics, and legislation, where last week a bill was introduced in Congress by Adam Schiff, AOC, and Donald Norcross to make striking workers eligible for unemployment insurance nationwide. Receivers of billions of dollars in public money from the CHIPS Act have nevertheless been found to have very exploitative labor practices. That's why last week a community coalition sent an open letter to the CEOs of beneficiary companies calling on them to uphold the standards recommended in the act. From the Alabama Reflector, the end of the COVID emergency will mean a 15% cut in the Alabama Department of Human Resources DHR funding in the current fiscal year due to declines in federal funding. In internal union affairs, after an election complaint was filed in the officer elections for the Machinists District Lodge 19, that is the national division of the International Association of Machinists that represent railroad workers, the Department of Labor has now ordered a rerun of the election, date to be determined. Palestine was reportedly a hot topic at the National AFLCIO Executive Council meeting last week, and it was reportedly dominated by a 30-minute anti-Israel monologue from the president of the American Postal Workers Union, who described himself as, quote, an anti-Zionist Jew. The presidents of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Laborers International Union of North America, and the International Union of Operating Engineers signed a national tri-trade solar agreement governing the construction of utility-scale solar projects, making it easier for developers, contractors, and unions to bring critical renewable energy generation online to power America's communities. That's a very exciting development. And that wraps it up for last week in Southern labor. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Got a few more folks in the chat. Strom says, solidarity from South Carolina with a $2 super chat. Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, maybe the Lockheed Martin Union can shut them down to avoid sending more weapons over abroad. That would be great. I'm not totally sure if they'd be on board with that. But the ILWU has done stuff like that in the past, and very, very cool of them to do that. Infinite Content says, hey, Septiv's Union has a tentative agreement to avoid a strike next week. Very, very good. Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, whatever standards are recommended regarding the CHIPS Act versus required, you can be sure that corporations will take the cheap, exploitative way out. And that's exactly the issue with the CHIPS Act. And we have had reporters on the program talking about the labor exploitation that companies are doing with our money from the CHIPS Act, because They are not required. These standards are not required. They are only recommended, and that's the issue with all this money that is, flooding the court in the semiconductor manufacturing industry. The argument against requiring it would be that it would make it too onerous, and that these companies might not choose to create semiconductors in the United States at all, which is firstly a dubious argument. I doubt it. If you give companies enough money, you can saddle them with whatever requirements you want. But even if that were the case, we could just do it as the government. I mean, there's absolutely nothing stopping the United States government from standing up operations and manufacturing semiconductors themselves, other than, a lack of imagination and neoliberal brainworms. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break. When we get back, we're going to be talking about the tentative agreement at Ford. There are some really big gains, and we're going to be talking about what that means next in the UAW's stand-up strike. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Hure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Hure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morris, and my co-host is Adam Keller, and we've got some great stuff for you today, in particular, the UAW's new tentative agreement at Ford. Really cool stuff happening there. And, you know, this agreement came after the UAW expanded their strike to the 6,800 workers at Stellantis' Sterling Heights Assembly Plant in Michigan on Monday, which is the Stellantis' most profitable plant, and 5,000 workers at General Motors' Arlington Assembly Plant in Texas on Tuesday. It also came after the week prior, the UAW struck Ford's Kentucky truck plant, which is responsible for 54% of Ford's profits, and another huge Ford moneymaker is the plant that manufactures the Ford F-150s. And so what they were doing in the stand-up strike by standing up at Sterling Heights in Michigan and the Stellantis' Sterling Heights Assembly Plant in Michigan and General Motors' Arlington Assembly Plant in Texas on Monday and Tuesday was basically telegraphing that if Ford didn't meet them where they needed to be, then on Wednesday, the F-150 plant was going out. And so that is, and that's what Fain said in his live stream earlier in the week. He said that Ford knew what was coming for them on Wednesday if we didn't get a deal. And so Ford was highly motivated to get a deal because after the Kentucky truck plant was taken out, if you take out the Ford F-150 plant, you are really cutting into Ford's operations and their ability to maintain a profit. And so, they're... and you know, this is huge. The strategy is hugely responsible for them being able to get what they got here at Ford. And you know, we're never going to see, obviously, recantations by the extremely silly people who were saying that this strike strategy was not radical enough, or that they knew better how to conduct a strike because they have YouTube shows and have never been in a union in their life, much less been in contract negotiations, much less asked their coworkers to go on strike, right? But still, for people that were listening to them, it's definitely worth taking a look at what they want in this tentative agreement and how they want it, because by telegraphing, that this is what's next for you, Ford, if you don't meet us where you need to meet us on Wednesday, they were only able to do that because they were striking all three at once, but they weren't striking all three at once. So they were able to play the companies against each other exactly like the companies have been playing workers against each other for decades. And you know that this is an effective strategy because the CEOs have been going absolutely nuts in the business press talking about how unfair it is to play these companies off of each other when they need to be united against the non-union automakers. but this is what companies have been doing to workers for decades. They've been whipsawing us. They've been whipsawing us in union strongholds versus other union strongholds, saying, okay, this union local here in Michigan, they accepted this, and so that's why here in New York, you've got to accept this. They've been doing that inside of the country with union plants versus non-union plants, saying to union plants, look, if you don't accept this, then we're going to have to open a non-union plant and take all of our production over there instead of working here. And they've been doing that with plants in the United States and plants outside of the United States, saying, look, if you can't do it for this much here, then we'll go to Mexico where we can do it for dollars a day. And that is also the importance of not only ending tiers in the United States, but also ending tiers internationally. And I am very, very hopeful that that will be a big project of the UAW moving forward after this strike is over, specifically getting wages internationally closer to what we have in Western countries, in European and the United States manufacturing centers. So anyway, let's talk about that tentative agreement that they won at Ford. Oh, but also one more exposition before we get into the details of the agreement. The press has been reporting this agreement much more cautiously than they have with any other tentative agreement that I have ever seen in my life. And I like that. And that is because of the way that Shawn Fain has presented this, right? Like, so basically in every other union, when they get a tentative agreement, they're really, really pushing it. Ratification is more or less a foregone conclusion, and that's how the union reports it to the press. And because there are no labor reporters in the press anymore, the press basically takes the press release and reprints it and says, okay, well, this is what it is. The issue is over now. And that's not what Shawn Fain did in his live stream last week. He said that, this is what we have in this agreement, but he repeatedly reiterated that the membership has the final word on whether this is enough. Repeatedly emphasizing that point, that the membership is the highest authority in the union and they have the power to vote this agreement up or down. And that's huge. And that's true in the UAW, and it's true in any other contract negotiations. But the leadership in many other unions, most other unions, do not emphasize that point like Shawn Fain did, giving the members, like underlining for the members that they have the autonomy to decide whether this is enough. And I really loved that. And because of that, the business press has been reporting it much more cautiously. I even saw one headline, I think in the Washington Post or the New York Times, that said Ford has a tentative agreement with the UAW. Tentative is the key word. And so that's, really great to see that kind of language recognizing the autonomy that the members have in the democracy in the negotiation process. Really, really love that. And so this is the first step in ratifying this agreement. They have reached a tentative agreement at the bargaining table. The next step is that the UAW's National Ford Council is going to vote on whether to send the tentative agreement to the membership, right? So this is basically a preliminary vote saying, like, does the National Ford Council think this is enough? If the National Ford Council doesn't think it's enough, then it's not worth sending down to the membership, and they're going to go back to the negotiating table. But assuming that the Ford Council approves it, then the next step is that on Sunday night, Shawn Fain said that they're going to be having a Facebook live stream to review the tentative agreement and publicly, and giving a highlighter that will be published online, and a change pages or a white book will be published online. And that's basically the contract, and everywhere that there are changes to the contract. So the changes will be marked out and the new language will be put in the white book. The fourth step is going to be regional meetings to walk through the tentative agreement with local leaders. And then the fifth step is that locals will hold informational meetings to review and discuss tentative agreement and then hold ratification votes. So very clearly laying out their democratic ratification bonus, and much that rhetoric is very, very, very welcome as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So without further ado, let's talk about what they won in this contract. The total value of this contract is over 4 times more than the value of the 2019 contract. That is huge. Additionally, in this contract, there are more in raises than the past 22 years combined. So really, really big movement here. And so specifically in this contract, the general wage increase is 25%. The all wage increases from 2001 to 2022 were only 23%. So there's going to be more movement in the next 4 years on wages than there were over the past 20 years. In addition to the general wage increase, like we have repeatedly informed everybody on the shows, they won the 2009 Ford COLA formula back. And so, with estimates of inflation, the expectation is, once you factor COLA in, that the total wage increase is going to be 33% after COLA. So 25% general wage increase, 33% after COLA. So really, really big gains there. The top wage will increase about 33% through the 2023 agreement, through the end of the agreement. It's going to end in 2027. It's a 4-year agreement. The starting wage will increase by about 68%. They were able to take the progression down from 8 or 9 years to 3, which is something that the UAW has not had since the 90s. A 3-year progression. So you're going to be starting 68% higher than you would have and getting to 33% higher than the previous ceiling in less than half the time. So really, really huge movement. Current temporary employees at Ford will get a 150% raise through the 2023 agreement. They're going to be making more than double what they make now by 2027. Some workers at Sterling Axle and Rawsonville, which is their parts distribution centers, will be seeing up to an 85% raise immediately. Immediately on ratification. Because of how they had, remember, the parts distribution centers at Ford, GM, and Stellantis were basically on a second tier of employment where, you know, they were making $20 an hour, where the assembly plant workers were making like $30-something an hour. And so they've eliminated that tier. Parts distribution centers at Ford are now on the assembly plant schedule. And so with that, the lowest paid workers at these parts distribution centers are going to be seeing an 85% raise immediately. I mean, imagine almost doubling your salary overnight. That's what the UAW has done for these people at Ford. They, like I said, won back 3-year wage progression, the 2009 COLA formula, and ending tiers. Since they launched the stand-up strike, Ford's offer has increased in value by 50%. They also won the right to strike over plant closures, which is totally unheard of. I don't think that the UAW has ever had an agreement like that in a contract with Ford. And what that means is a right to strike over plant closures. That means that over the course of this agreement, if Ford tries to outsource any of their production from the United States to other countries, or just to close a plant indefinitely, then the UAW is going to have the right to strike over that, to put pressure on the company to not follow through with that decision. Unions have not had that amount of power written in black and white in the union contract? I don't think ever. That is a huge, huge concession from Ford. I mean, and you know, if you know anything about unions or collective bargaining, or you've been part of the collective bargaining process, the no strike clause is basically treated as sacrosanct. It is not. It's just taken for granted. There's not even really any discussion about it. It's just, okay, you know, we agree not to lock you out over the course of this contract, and you agree not to strike. And so them getting this back, huge, absolutely huge. There's also going to be a $5,000 signing bonus. And in addition to the signing bonus, there reportedly talks that there is going to be some amount of compensation on top of that for workers that have been on strike. Presumably not a one-to-one, like a dollar for dollar, what they would have made if they had been working, but really any amount of compensation for having been on strike is another enormous concession on the part of Ford, and a really big win from for the UAW. So we are really, really excited to see that.
Jacob, I know that the details are still coming out on the agreement, and I believe you mentioned that tomorrow night is when we're going to get a lot more information.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know much about the retirees?
They did say, they were not specific, but they did say that that there will be increases to current retiree contributions, increases to 401k contributions, and I think they said there were going to be increases to pension payouts for folks that are for folks currently working when they retire. So they were not super specific about the changes to the retirement plans, but they did say that there had been movement.
Right. And yeah, I just know, particularly here in Alabama, we have a lot of retired UAW members. And so just curious if, you know, what we know right now. And of course, there's just a lot more to find out. So it's going to be interesting to see the full details, but a lot of big wins already. And, you know, we'll see how the membership feels about it. And we'll also see what happens with GM and Stellantis if they start to follow suit. But, I mean, those numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on, I think I saw a question in the chat about whether or not they're going to be working, and they are going to be returning to work at Ford during the negotiation, during the tentative agreement ratification process. And that's another benefit of the kind of stand-up strike strategy, is because this is going to put pressure on, put even more pressure on GM and Stellantis to come to a deal, because the last thing that they want is for Ford's operations to be up and running while the UAW is still striking GM and Stellantis. So a lot of flexibility and a lot of, a lot of wins at Ford
right.
by the UAW.
Right. And one thing I think is worth just remembering for folks, especially, you know, if you're listening to this and you're not a union member, you know, I hope it's worth pulling out, like, the fact that the members get to vote on this agreement, right? The members have the final say. And collective bargaining is not a perfect process by any means, but compared to the alternative where you don't have any formal input into your wages and working conditions and benefits, the ability to have folks, to have input into folks negotiating, and then the ability to vote on that agreement up or down, I think that is just a taste of democracy in the workplace that really is something that all workers should have the opportunity to enjoy, and it's something that is a clear union advantage and union difference.
Yep.
And I think there are probably auto workers all over the area, including right here in North Alabama, who are seeing this and listening to this and wondering, you know, how they can get in on it, and how they could actually, benefit from these sort of gains as well.
Yep, and it's absolutely within the power of the workers at these non-union automakers. They absolutely can get what the UAW has won at Ford and GM, because, you know, and this is something that that people just don't think about anymore. Well, it had been when I was growing up. It kind of had been taken for granted plant work, manufacturing work was a career. That was a good job. That was a good paying middle class job. And that is becoming less and less taken for granted. It was taken for granted because of the labor movement. The manufacturing jobs, production jobs, were not always good career middle-class jobs.
Absolutely
not.
They
were, in fact, some of the worst, most transient employment, temporary work, bottom-of-the-barrel jobs that you could get before the unions came in and transformed them into real good-paying jobs that could sustain a family. And the reason that that is less and less being taken for granted is because the corporations that have high union density have been fighting their unions for the past 4 or 5 decades and really taking back a lot of the things that unions have won. And there have been a lot of foreign non-union manufacturing companies come into the United States and have been fighting unions tooth and nail since they got here so that they could continue a bottom-of-the-barrel employment approach. And so if we want to see manufacturing jobs being able to be taken for granted as a good-paying occupation again, then we're going to have to see a resurgence of unionization in the manufacturing sector. And the hope is, and I think there's a reasonable expectation that that's going to be led by the UAW. Sean Fain has said in one of his live streams that that is his plan. That we're going to win record contracts at the big three. We are going to organize in non-union automakers like we never have before, and so that's been explicitly laid out by the union as a strategy, and so there is every reason to expect that that's what's going to happen. And there's every reason to believe, there's every reason to know for a fact that workers have the capability to turn this profession into a good-paying, middle-class profession again, because it used to be, and it can be again. Obviously, there's going to need to be some attention paid to the law, to the ability of companies to outsource and import goods made by bottom of the barrel, race to the bottom, exploitative conditions. But there's a lot of things that that can be done immediately to make these jobs better. So Palestine has been a huge news item. I mean, that's basically all people are talking about as far as the news. And it is really, really amazing how quickly people will be smeared with the with the title anti-Semite, just because you don't think it's good to kill a bunch of civilians. It's bonkers. It doesn't reflect well on the seriousness of the people making those allegations, and it harkens back to the days in the 1950s when anybody who wanted an 8-hour day or a 40-hour work week or a higher wage or more time off was called a communist and blacklisted. It harkens back to the days after 2001 where if you didn't support the absolute flattening of the entire Middle East by the United States of America, you were considered a terrorist sympathizer. And that's exactly the language that's being used against people who don't believe that Israel should flatten Gaza, and that don't believe, at the very, very least, that our tax dollars should go towards flattening Gaza. Remember, Gaza, the residency, 2 million people live in Gaza, about 50% of which are under the age of 18. These people are obviously not responsible for what happened on October 7th. Obviously so. And people will retort that Hamas is the democratically elected government of Gaza. And so, for one, That's curious to me because I've always been told that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. So what, is it Israel and Gaza? Is Israel and Gaza the only democracies in the Middle East? So that's kind of strange. I thought Israel was the only democracy in the Middle East. Okay. But putting that aside, Hamas was elected in Gaza in 2006 in 2006. And so, remember, approximately 50% of the people in Gaza are under the age of 18, right? So they couldn't even vote. Half the population can't vote now, much less could have voted for Hamas in 2006. According to statistical analysis, only 7% of people who currently live in Gaza voted for Hamas. And so you cannot say that these people are responsible for what Hamas does. You can't hold them responsible, and you can't go around willy-nilly murdering them. And another response is that, Israel cares about whether or not they kill civilians. That's the difference between them and Hamas. And I just want to read you a few quotes from members of Israel's government. And then you can tell me whether or not that assertion is true. Here is Ariel Kalner, a member of parliament from Netanyahu's Likud party. Right now, one goal, Nakba. A Nakba that will overshadow the Nakba of 48. Nakba in Gaza and Nakba to anyone who dares to join. And Nakba, remember, the translation is catastrophe. That is what people refer to when they talk about, that is the name given to the event in which hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from their homes. So that's what he's wanting again. He's explicitly saying, we just want to get rid of every Palestinian in Gaza and take it over. Revital Gottlieb, another parliament member from the Likud party, said, only an explosion that shakes the Middle East will restore the country's dignity, strength, and security. It's time for a doomsday weapon, shooting powerful missiles without limit, not flattening a neighborhood, crushing and flattening Gaza. Giora Eiland, a reservist major general and former head of the Israeli National Security Council, wrote in a popular Hebrew language newspaper, the state of Israel has no choice but to turn Gaza into a place that is temporarily or permanently impossible to live in. Israel needs to create a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, compelling tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands to seek refuge in Egypt or the Gulf. And indeed, that Israel must demand that the entire population of Gaza will either move to Egypt or move to the Gulf. Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. Here's another quote. Minister of Foreign Affairs Eli Cohen said, at the end of this war, not only will Hamas no longer be in Gaza, the territory of Gaza will also decrease. Israeli Minister Gideon Sa'ar said that Gaza must be smaller by the end of the war, specifying that he meant both in the east and the north, because losing land is the price of loss that Arabs understand. We must make the end of our campaign clear to everyone around us. Whoever starts a war against Israel must lose territory. There's also been scoffing at the idea that the international community should care what happens to Palestinian babies, laughing and scoffing and yelling at news people who ask questions about that. Journalists' families have been murdered. The entire family of one Al Jazeera journalist was killed in an Israeli airstrike after Blinken told Qatar that Al Jazeera needs to, the day after Blinken told Qatar that Al Jazeera needs to cut back on their coverage of Israel-Palestine. There have been references to Palestinians as human animals. Palestinians, not Hamas. I mean, really wicked rhetoric. And that is why some people in the labor movement, an increasing number of people in the labor movement, are calling for a ceasefire, are backing the calls for a ceasefire by Jewish peace groups and other human rights organizations in Gaza, including Mark Dimenstein, the president of the American Postal Workers Union. I mentioned this in Last Week in Southern Labor, but the AFLCIO Executive Council had a meeting last week where Mark Dimenstein spoke at length about the crisis, reportedly, in the New York Times, saying that the AFL-CIO needs to call for a ceasefire. And indeed, that is what Palestinian trade unions have called on labor internationally to call for. Palestinian trade unions have called on trade unions across the world to no longer to cease shipment and production of arms and weapons that are slated to be sent to Israel. And they have called on labor internationally to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. The bombing campaign in Gaza has now killed 7,000 people, about half of whom are under the age of 18. I mean, they have bombed the building beside and thus damaged the structure of the third oldest church in the world, killing Christians, the relatives of former congressional representative Justin Amash. People forget that, but Palestinians are Muslims and Christians and some Jews that Israel is killing. And for that, for saying that, hey, we should maybe take a step back and stop killing a bunch of people, people are being called terrorists. It's absolutely, it's just amazing. Especially, additionally, when you consider, another thing to consider is that Hamas recently released a conditions for the surrender of the hostages. The condition for the surrender of the foreign-born hostages is just a 5-day ceasefire. 5 days of no bombs in Gaza. Again, and remember, the Palestinian people have no control over what Hamas does. There are no elections. They have no way to control what Hamas does, which is why the destruction of Gaza is a war crime, is collective punishment. Because, even if the people in Gaza had a say over what Hamas does, it would still be something like collective punishment because, people in the United States voted in 2004 for George Bush, but that would not have given people the justification to murder a bunch of American civilians. And so it is even more unacceptable and unjustifiable to do the same to Palestinian civilians who have no say over the governing body. It's just really, really insane. And so Hamas has said 5-day ceasefire, foreign-born hostages will be let go. To get for the Israeli hostages, they have said that, let's pull this up. Oh, well, I thought I had it. I can't remember what it was for the Israeli hostages, but it was, I do not remember it being something insane, something that seems unreasonable. Which is obviously, it's not in any at all remote defense of Hamas or what they did on October the 7th. This is just to say that the Palestinian people are not responsible and that not only is it not justifiable to murder them and ethnically cleanse the region, kill a bunch of babies, it is in fact going to be the breeding ground for either the next generation of Hamas recruits or something very similar, if not worse, to Hamas. Because how would you feel if a government kills your entire family that had never done anything to harm the government that killed your entire family? What would that do to your psyche? And you know, people pretend not to understand that. People pretend not to understand that. Another union that has been kind of at the center of this of the issue with in Palestine and Israel in the American discourse is Starbucks Workers United, where Starbucks Workers United put out a tweet that was I would agree was uncouth and not, you know, not really representative of a thoughtful position on the conflict, and was quickly taken down, was not approved by the union membership. But because of that tweet, that one tweet, Starbucks is now waging a campaign trying to smear and tar the entirety of the membership of Starbucks Workers United as terrorist supporters or an anti-Semitic, and just really, really gross, craven, cynical stuff, because, of course, the people who are saying these things know it not to be true. They obviously know it not to be true. And so in These Times magazine, Lynn Fox, the international president of Workers United, which is the union that Starbucks Workers United is affiliated with, she wrote an op-ed responding to Starbucks attacks on her union and on these people's membership. And she opened with the fact that my grandmother and my aunt were murdered at Treblinka, one of the deadliest Nazi concentration camps. 6 months before liberation, my grandfather died in Nordhausen. This is a Jewish international union president, responding to this. And so she says, and she went more into her family's history, and then she says, so you can imagine my shock and deep hurt when this week the world's largest coffee company launched a series of attacks on me and more than 9,000 Starbucks workers who have voted to join together in a union, alleging that we support terrorism, hate, and violence. She says the company seized on a single tweet from the Starbucks Workers United Twitter account expressing solidarity with Palestine that was written by one person and not authorized by the union or its workers, and that was quickly deleted. It conveniently ignored other tweets that called for peace. And that's a crucial thing to understand if you actually want to be in good faith about what's going on. Starbucks Workers United have put out a very clear statement on Palestine, and here's what they said. The members of Starbucks Workers United stand in solidarity with the Palestinians' people's right to self-determination. We are opposed to violence, and each death, that obviously means the Israeli deaths, the deaths of Israeli civilians. Each death occurring as the result of violence is a tragedy, and we absolutely condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Our union's members endorse the comprehensive statement of support from Jewish Voice for Peace, which provides powerful context on why we all must stand in solidarity with Palestinians. This statement reflects the diversity of our campaign. We are a union with Jewish, Palestinian, and Muslim workers. We condemn the occupation, displacement, and state violence, apartheid, and threats of genocide Palestinians face. Furthermore, we condemn Starbucks for shamefully using this devastating humanitarian crisis to make false statements against our union and to vilify us. Our members face threats and harassment across our country, which are disproportionately affecting our Muslim, Jewish, and Palestinian co-workers. If Starbucks is concerned about the, quote, safety and well-being of its workers, as they have recently claimed, we suggest that the company bargain in good faith with us regarding the health and safety proposed by the union months ago. Instead, it appears the company seeks to score points by baselessly attacking our union. We demand Starbucks apologize and acknowledge the harm they've done. We call on other labor unions to stand in solidarity with Starbucks Workers United on these two issues. And so this is a very clear statement, very clearly not supporting any of the acts of violence from Hamas, the acts of terrorism on October the 7th. And yet Starbucks is continuing with this baseless lie and suing Starbucks Workers United for copyright infringement, which is a case that has been tried and failed by other companies. But that's not going to stop Starbucks. The company is using that one tweet too. And this is back to the op-ed from Lynn Fox. The company is using that one tweet too over and over again, falsely paint Workers United, whose forerunners, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, ILGWU, and the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union, were founded by Jewish immigrants who welcomed workers of every race, religion, and ethnicity. They are tarring these people as unhinged supporters of terrorism. Like the Starbucks workers who are building their union, the ILGWU was founded at the turn of the last century, mostly by young workers. Many in the labor movement at the time thought that because they were mainly young women, they were unorganizable, as some today think of baristas and other food service workers. Never mind the fact, Starbucks saw an opportunity to capitalize on the horror and tragic events in the Middle East to further its unprecedented illegal union-busting campaign, trying to bully workers into abandoning their union name and logo via a cease and desist letter and a federal lawsuit. And then even more crazy stuff coming out, because people always talk about how unions want to destroy business. Unions don't want to destroy the businesses they work for. They want to turn the businesses that they work for into more democratic organizations, into organizations that can provide living wages and better working conditions for their people, that can provide better services to their communities. Obviously, unions don't want to destroy the businesses that they work for. It doesn't even make sense if you think about it for less than half a second. But that's what people say. And yet, Starbucks now, Lynn says, their attacks have reached a new level when on Thursday, October 19th, the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce posted on its website that it had spoken to Starbucks founder Howard Shoals and worked with him and the Starbucks corporate team to identify unionized Starbucks stores that the OJC's members could boycott.
Wow.
So an implicit endorsement of a boycott of their own stores based on a lie to try to destroy the union. None of this is about any concern for Jewish people or Israelis or Palestinians. This is all a cover by Starbucks to try to destroy the union, to try to slander the members of the union. And people who pretend not to see that for what it is are doing exactly that. They're pretending. They're lying. Lynn says, I, along with the leaders of Workers United, am responsible for these 9,000 plus workers, most of whom are in their teens and early 20s. We spoke to a 16-year-old who was on the organizing committee of the Scottsboro Starbucks Union. They're rightfully terrified by all of this, especially given the heightened tensions around the conflict in the Middle East and the fact that we've already seen disgusting acts of bigoted violence in the United States. I am afraid, one worker told us. My mom doesn't want me to go to work. Another wrote, I saw this and started panicking. Starbucks is putting its own employees at risk. Starbucks is doing this by saying that these people, everybody at union stores, supports terrorism. I mean, what is the actual reasonable response if you see people that support terrorism? Certainly not economically supporting them is one thing you would do, but you would potentially even be moved to violence, right? If somebody actually legitimately supports unjustified terrorism, then what else do you do but react with violence? That's what Starbucks is doing to these workers. She says the company's board must step in and put a stop to Starbucks action before someone gets hurt. If my dad were here, I know he would want me to speak out. In his memory and channeling his strength and resilience, I do so here. Never forget. And so that's what's happening with Starbucks and Palestine. And that's another good, you wrote this in the notes doc, Adam. Where are the free speech warriors? People are being fired left and right for the silliest of reasons. Not because, there are some people that are out of line, that are far out of line, I have seen, in my view. But the vast majority of people are simply saying that Israel needs to end its destruction of Gaza. And for that, people are being fired. And of course, and over tweets, and remember, actually, I don't know, Adam, if you knew this, but Elon Musk said when he took over the website that he would fund the defense of anybody who was fired for their tweets.
Really? I wonder how that's going.
Yeah. I am not aware of him funding the defense of anybody who has been retaliated against for their support of the Palestinian people, however.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. Must have missed it.
I must have missed it. Yeah. So, really, really, really gross stuff.
Yeah, Starbucks is just incredibly cynical.
Yeah. Absolutely gross stuff. And so, there we go. Appreciate everybody tuning in. And we've got about 30 people watching us only on YouTube and only 10 likes. So let's get those numbers up if we could. We appreciate everybody in the chat. Like I said, we've got Strom. We've got Chloe in the chat. Appreciate that. Sid, David, thank you all for joining Infinite Content. And Strom with a $5 super chat says, "Why should any industry not be an industry of career tier jobs?" Indeed, that is a question that has an answer, and the answer is there is no reason that any industry should not be an industry of career tier jobs. Any industry, if it's worth doing and if it needs to be done, then you ought to be paid well to do it. Jacob says, not me, says, "Thank y'all for covering this. I know it's hard to see this as a working class labor issue, but it very much is." And it very much is, because the people being killed are workers, right? I mean, right? That's the issue. That is what is at issue. That's why it's a labor issue. Not only, in addition to the fact that the people who are being killed are workers, and unionism ought to be international in its outlook, and so therefore when workers are being attacked anywhere, workers are being attacked everywhere, and we should all stand in solidarity with workers when they are under attack. But also because we are the ones, or workers in the United States, by and large, are the ones producing the weapons. And so this is something that is very, very relevant to people.
And we're funding it to the tune of nearly $4 billion a year in military aid to the state of Israel, which is carrying out these war crimes. Yep. So, we're paying for that.
TSLAL Collective, I think that's Charles, says, and this is another thing that's important that people that came out yesterday, I think it was. Biden said in a statement that they have given Israel no red lines regarding their treatment of Gaza, including their treatment of the American hostages. And that's another thing about this that people don't really ever kind of reckon with. Where would Hamas be keeping the hostages? Presumably they don't know. They haven't said. If they knew, presumably they would send special forces in and get them and take them out. The hostages are unaccounted for. They don't know where they are. They could very well be being killed in these bombings. If the concern was actually for the hostages, which I'm concerned about, I could not imagine being held hostage for weeks on end, and then being held hostage for weeks on end while my own government is bombing the ground above me. Presumably they're in some of these tunnels. The ground above me. I could not imagine being the relative of one of these hostages, concerned for their safety from Israel as much as Hamas. But the concern is not actually for the hostages. The concern is for their value as propaganda objects. 91 Kella says, I'm with UAW Local 551 in Chicago on strike for a month with Ford. C crew went back today. A crew goes back Monday, and B crew goes back Tuesday. Scale pay was $31.60 an hour. Very good, very good. I know that after a month on strike, I know that y'all are ready to start getting paychecks again, so I'm really happy for y'all that y'all got this and that y'all are going to be going back to work soon with a good contract. All right, so let's go ahead and take our final break. We're going to be right back with Boss Watch. Talk to you about what Southern bosses were up to in the last week. Don't go anywhere.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at AFGE.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFLCIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
As labor union members, we face our share of challenges in the workplace. But today, I want to talk about a different kind of challenge, the climate crisis. We've all seen the fury of Mother Nature, the storms that can turn lives upside down in an instant. That's why Hometown Action is launching our Climate Protection Project. We're heading out to 10 rural communities, listening to local folks, and taking action with them to protect communities impacted by climate disasters. And we need you, our union brothers and sisters to join us. Together, we'll make a difference. Our strength on the job is undeniable, and now it's time to put that strength to work for the planet. Let's protect our communities, our families, and our future. Visit hometownaction.org today and sign up to volunteer for the Climate Protection Canvas.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. We are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. We have got the likes up over the break. We are now at 50 people watching us live. Only 36 likes, however, up from 10. Let's get those numbers up. Should be at least even. Come on, folks. There's at least 13 of y'all out there that are watching me, listening to me right now on YouTube, haven't liked the stream. If you haven't liked the stream, you might not even be subscribed to the show. Subscribe to the show, subscribe to the channel so that you never miss anything that we put out, because we're always putting out stuff. Always putting out good stuff, might I add. Adam, you've got an event coming up soon. Talk to us about it.
Sure thing. Yeah, I do have an event. I wanted to make sure I mention this for the FM radio audience as well. On Tuesday, November 14th, I'm going to be hosting a People's Town Hall in Huntsville, working with Alabama Arise. This will be my first event with Alabama Arise. And we're going to have a town hall Tuesday, November 14th from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Huntsville Downtown Library. It's going to be in the auditorium. And really, I'm looking forward to it. We're going to have some breakout group discussions on worker policy. So I'm really hoping union folks will show up for that, as well as criminal justice reform and health care. There'll be space if, you have other statewide policy issues you want to talk about. But, just to sort of walk you through what we're going to do, this is going to be open for members of the public and, of course, Alabama Rise members, labor union members, allies, anyone who's interested in building a better Alabama for all of us. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Alabama Rise is and our priorities, preview a couple of key issues, and then break out into these groups just to have some good conversations around these really important areas that affect all of us. Again, those are criminal justice, healthcare, and worker policy. So at the end, we'll report back as a whole group, kind of share what we learned, what we discussed, the ideas that were thrown around, and really take a look at what are some of the policy solutions that we could put forward in Alabama. What could we do to make Alabama a better place for all of us, especially the least of these here in our state? And then we'll wrap up. And I really am looking forward to it. We just kind of went live with the event page or the event details over the past couple days. There's a Facebook event out there. Those of you on the Alabama Rise email list, I think, already received something. But again, that's Tuesday, November 14th, 5:30 to 7. Y'all come on out if you want to talk about some statewide policy issues and just meet your neighbors and hear from other folks about what their concerns are. Really looking forward to it. And, again, I really hope some labor union folks, hope to see some union kin there to discuss worker policy and brainstorm on, what would it look like if we had worker advocates in Montgomery? What would it look like if we could pass legislation that benefited workers in the state of Alabama? What are some government actions that would actually change things for working class people, because we need that change so desperately here. I don't have to tell y'all that conditions for working folks here in Alabama are well beyond shameful really. The conditions here faced by so many working people and so many people in poverty. So anytime we can gather folks together, everyday people to come together, talk about our common interest and how we can work together to make things better, I'm all about it. So yeah, y'all are invited. Come on out.
All right. Let's go ahead and talk about Boss Watch. Boss Watch is a segment that we do every week where we talk about what bosses were up to in the South in the U.S. because you're all the time seeing mugshots on the news about somebody engaging in petty theft or trespassing, but you never see when bosses do it. So we want to make sure that you do here at the very least. Over in Kentucky, less than 6 months after an investigation found 3 Kentucky fast food franchises employing more than 300 children outside of federally allowed hours, the U.S. Department of Labor has discovered another Louisville restaurant enterprise violating child labor laws, this time with 55 children at 9 locations across the state of Kentucky. Investigators from the department's Wage and Hour Division determined Cock-a-Doodle-Doo LLC, operating as Rooster's Wings, employed 14 and 15-year-olds beyond what is legally allowed at 9 of its locations across Kentucky. The agency found these 55 employees working past 7 p.m. from the day after Labor Day through May 31st and past 9 p.m. from June the 1st through Labor Day, and more than 8 hours on a non-school day, and more than 18 hours during a school week. The agency assessed $43,000 in penalties for Cock-a-Doodle-Doo to address the child labor violations, but that's not all. In addition to the child labor violations, the employer failed to combine the hours when employees worked across multiple locations within the same work week. By doing so, the company paid straight time rates to the employees for all hours worked instead of the time and a half rate, due for hours worked over 40 as the law requires. The agency recovered a staggering $182,000 in back wages and liquidated damages for 7 workers to account for these violations. Split $200,000 between 7 folks. I'm going to be pretty happy about that. Although it's money that was owed to me already, that was stolen from me, but they're not going to go to jail. They just got to give me my money back. Over in Mississippi, Olin Corporation, one of the world's leading small arms and ammunition makers, has entered into an agreement with the U.S. Department of Labor in which the employer will pay $630,000 in back wages and interest to resolve alleged hiring discrimination against 286 black and women applicants who applied for positions over 2 years at its Oxford facility. A routine compliance investigation of Olin Corporation by the Department's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs alleged that from December the 9th, 2017 through December the 9th, 2019, the federal contractor violated Executive Order 11246 when hiring for Adjuster 2 positions. The order prohibits federal contractors from discriminating in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Olin Corporation entered into an early resolution conciliation agreement and agreed to take steps to make sure its selection process, personnel practices, and hiring policies are free from discrimination. The employer will also offer jobs to 46 black and female affected applicants as positions become available. Over in Alabama, and here's something that I wanted to point out because these people actually did go to jail, but not for the reason you might think. The chief financial officer for a Shelby County agency is accused of stealing nearly $200,000 to fund cosmetic surgery, a Florida vacation, and more. This is from AL.com. Cindy Massey, 65, of Pell City, served as CFO for the Arc of Shelby County, an advocacy agency for child and adults with developmental disabilities. Massey was booked into the Shelby County Jail this week on a theft of property charge and released the same day after posting a $30,000 bond. From May the 1st, 2022 through August the 15th, 2023, Massey and her 36-year-old daughter, Jennifer Massey, each used company credit cards to make hundreds of purchases in St. Clair, Shelby, and Jefferson County, as well as over the internet in Florida and in Florida, records state. These purchases included rent on a personal residence, car payments, car repairs, veterinary services, at least one Florida vacation, cosmetic surgery procedures, inmate phone credits at the Shelby County Jail, and internet purchases delivered to Pelham. Massey then used her position as CFO to use ARC's funds to pay the credit bills, according to the complaint. Jennifer Massey is also charged with theft of property but has not yet been taken into custody. She is also charged with probation violation for a previous identity theft conviction. And here's the thing. I talked about they went to jail, or one of them has been to jail, released on a $30,000 bond. The other is going to be arrested soon, presumably. But that's because they stole from a corporation. Because corporations are people, so much so that if you steal from them, you go to jail. And yet, if you steal from workers in the form of not paying us our legally due wages, you do not go to jail. You get a slap on the wrist at best. The most you can expect to happen to you is that you have to give me back what you stole from me. That's it, right? That's like the height of restitution that workers can expect. And yet corporations are so much so people that if you steal from them, even as an executive officer of said corporation, you'll go to jail. It is just such an indictment of society that in many ways corporations are viewed as more of a person than the workers they employ. Pretty sick stuff. The last story is in Texas, where 2 employees of a national tank cleaning company suffered injuries when exposed to hydrogen sulfide, a flammable, highly toxic, colorless gas that was present during the cleaning process of a tanker truck on April 25, 2023 in Beaumont, Texas. 2 municipal firefighters responding to the scene also suffered injuries from the gas. Federal investigators determined that the employer, Trimac Transportation Incorporated, which operates as National Tank Services, did not provide adequate respiratory protection, resulting in 2 employees being transported to the hospital, one of them being hospitalized due to the exposure. The first responders were treated on the scene. Investigators with the U.S. Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration found National Tank Services did not evaluate the work site for possible respiratory hazards like the one that sickened the workers and did not monitor the employees for exposure to other substances. The company also failed to provide workers with appropriate respirators, manage a required respiratory protection program to provide workers with medical evaluations prior to respirator use, and failed to conduct respiratory fit testing. OSHA proposed penalties of about $400,000 to the company after citing 9 health violations, including 2 willful, 3 repeat, and 4 serious. Investigators also found National Tank Services again failed to provide protective clothing, eye, face, and hand protection, did not label containers, and failed to provide injury and illness logs to OSHA within 4 business hours. Violations previously cited in the past 5 years at their facilities in Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Workers were also exposed to fall hazards because the company failed to install mid-rails on the stairway and on the catwalk platform guardrail system. A subsidiary of Trimark Transportation of Canada, National Tank Services operates 30 maintenance and tank cleaning operations across North America. The company has 15 business days from receipt of citations and penalties to comply, to request an informal conference with OSHA's area director, or to contest the findings before the Independent Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. Adam, tell us our plugs.
All right, y'all. Let's wrap it up. As they do each month, our friends at Labor Notes are hosting a series of online trainings. Definitely recommend you check that out, labornotes.org/events. As I mentioned, People's Town Hall on Tuesday, November 14th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the downtown Huntsville Library. Our friends at the Southern Workers Assembly are hosting the Southern Worker School, November 10th through 12th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Check out our interview last week to learn more. I will be the guest speaker for the Green Party of Madison County meeting on November 8th at the North Huntsville Public Library, going to talk about labor and the environment. On that note, Saturday, November 4th, the Huntsville chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby is hosting a watch party at the South Huntsville Public Library from 11 to 4. Folks will be tuning in to a virtual conference called Grassroots Rising, Leveling Up in the Climate Fight. Finally, there will be a demonstration at Decatur City Hall on Sunday, October 29th at 4 p.m. demanding justice for Steve Perkins. And also, don't forget, we'll be back with Shop Talk on Thursday at 9:30. And if you're not already on our email list, definitely sign up at tvlr.fm.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for our the first half of our show today. We appreciate everybody tuning in, but we've got a whole second half of the show where we're going to be talking to Tom Ricks about his book, Waging a Good War. I'm really excited about this. I haven't been able to finish it, unfortunately. I don't know if you have, Adam, but it is a book about military strategy in the civil rights movement, and you'll be surprised at how related those two things are. We are also going to be calling in to another show Saturday in the Shoals on one of our partner stations, WZZA. They've got a Saturday show at noon, and they've asked us to jump on, and so we will. We're going to be talking to them, and we're going to be streaming it on our end as well, so you don't want to miss that. Yeah. So find us on YouTube or on Facebook at The Valley Labor Report. Continue listening to the show. 844-899-TVLR is the number if you want to talk to us in the second half of the show. That's the place to call in, 844-899-8857. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Okay, folks, we're off the radio. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Thanks for sticking with us. We've got 47 watching and 40 likes. The numbers are coming up.
That's right.
Get them further up there. 7 more to go before we're even.
Yeah, really appreciate everyone tuning in this morning. Appreciate y'all spending some time with us. I know you could be doing a lot of different things, but for whatever reason, you're listening to a couple Alabama dudes talk about the labor movement. Really appreciate that. It's been nice to see the engagement today, but it's always nice to have folks listening. It really does mean a lot to us, and all your support, the folks that share, the folks that subscribe, review, comment, call in, all the ways that folks can participate really does, add a lot to it, I think.
Yeah.
And, appreciate those that have supported us financially, of course, whether that's, individual donors, folks giving super chats like our brother Strom from South Carolina, as well as, the unions that have believed in us enough to run advertisements on our program because, we couldn't do it without that. So, it costs money to be on commercial radio time. It costs money to have operations, and we barely break even from month to month. We're not, making any money off this. We do it for the love of the cause, and we're really grateful that a lot of other people dig that and appreciate what we're trying to do.
Yep. With that, we're going to go ahead and take our final break. We'll be right back with the second half of the show. Stay tuned, folks. Folks, welcome back. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. We're now in the second half of the program. We are in overtime. That is the second half of the show, where we are online only. We have freed ourselves from the shackles of the FCC censors. Appreciate y'all tuning in to us. We've got another hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours if this interview on WZZA goes long. We'll see what happens, but I appreciate y'all tuning in. Somebody said amazing in the chat, and that sparked a conversation about Jesse Lee Peterson, and he's this right-wing radio guy who also does stuff online, and he's become something of like an ironic online sensation because he's like a caricature of what he's like a caricature of what a left-winger would say the most like depraved right-winger is, and it's very, very funny, and so that sparked a conversation about him, and that's kind of his taglines: amazing, and so there's some comments there about how Jesse Lee Peterson owned Ben. I don't know who they're talking about, Ben, but also Destiny. Destiny is a streamer, Adam, and Jesse Lee Peterson said that Destiny is using a girl's name by
checkmate.
Yeah, so pretty destroyed there. And so I said that if I ever get on JLP, then that's how I know that I'll have made it. That would be very interesting.
If I ever figure out what y'all are talking about, maybe I'll make it too. I am aware of slug burgers though. Now that conversation, like I'm with that.
What is a slug burger?
Oh, okay. Let's talk about a slug burger then. A slug burger is you take, some cheap meat, usually beef or it can be pork, and then you throw in some meat extender like soybeans or, I think they used to use, flour, potato cakes. Like, I don't know what all has been used for it. I think it has varied over time, but it's kind of a North Alabama, North Mississippi sort of thing, is my understanding. I've never really run into it anywhere else. Looking it up, it looks like maybe parts of Tennessee as well. But, you can find them in Athens, for example. Dub's Burgers is a place that sells those. It came out of the Depression, or, I don't know if it came out of the Depression. I know that it, I think, became more popular during the Depression. Obviously, you just couldn't make your meat last a little longer, so you put some filler in there. Cheap burgers. It's kind of a classic. Are they that great? Depends on your taste. It's kind of its own thing. I sometimes get just a hankering for some slug burgers, some Dubs in Athens, but then usually I satisfy that craving. I'm good for a while, but it is a classic. It's worth trying if you've never done it. All right. So yeah, way to go, Strom, for the slug burger educational seminar today.
Yeah. Appreciate the opportunity for that. Maybe I'll get a slug burger next time I'm in the Shoals.
Absolutely.
Was the France EV transition clip, was that the one that didn't work last week?
I think that maybe that was the case. I'm not sure.
Okay, that may have been the case. So we can save that. You want to talk about a little bit of what we've been up to the last week?
Sure. Yeah, I know you've been like a guest speaker.
Yeah.
We've both been quite busy lately and at a lot of meetings and doing lots of talking and all that kind of stuff. So what you been up to, Jacob?
Yeah, I have been. Actually, we got one caller actually though. So before we start talking about that, and we may not get to what we've been up to, because I do want to get the caller in on the line if we can, if we've got time for it. So let's bring him in. It's Infinite Content.
Yeah, let's see if I can make that
work. Let's bring
work.
him in for just a second before we go to our guest.
Fellas, how are you all this week?
Doing good. How are you?
Gosh, a couple of days this week, I got beaten to non-functionality at work. And I work at a pharmacy, so I just wanted to touch on what Sean Fain's doing and relate that to other industries, because pressure busts pipes. Pressure also creates diamonds, because they put that pressure on Ford, and they got the diamond of that contract. It's tentative, but it's still a good thing. Now, I don't know if you all are aware, but pharmacists and pharmacy techs are planning on doing a walkout on the 1st of November at like Walgreens and CVS's around the country. This is so strategic because you get another office worker. You aren't just going to pull a pharmacist off the street.
Right.
It's very tactically done. It's and if these pharmacists keep walking off the job, it's going to cause a public health crisis. So these companies need to give pharmacists more help and more staffing. Otherwise, they're going to do themselves a great disservice. And they're applying pressure in a way that is making all other pharmacy chains, like the supermarkets and like Walmart and other people, look at that with great alarm, because they're like, if we keep putting extra pressure on our pharmacists and the staff, we could be in the same situation. I just wanted to point that out real quick. SEPTA avoided their strike. Oh, did you all hear about I think it was in Sweden, that Tesla workers went on strike at one of their plants?
I actually saw that, just before we started the show.
I did not know that. That's cool.
Hadn't read anything about it other than the headline, but yeah.
And good old Millennium has lost another $28 billion in value. I'm like, he's one of the most. He actually exceeds Donald Trump in ineptness and management, because they showed that Twitter usage has dropped like something like 20% or something like that since he took over.
Mm-hmm.
It might be even more than that, but I just wanted to get you all's thoughts on those topics.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah,
It's been a dramatic decline in the Twitter usage. I've seen that as well. I'm not a Twitter guy, but I have seen how he has totally just, tanked the website.
Yeah.
And I also wanted...
I do want to bring up one thing, and it's a tough topic, but the state of Israel has cut off all communication, like cellular and internet in Gaza. And you only do that if you're about to engage into some heinous actions. So we should all have solidarity for the Palestinian people. Not Hamas, but the Palestinian people. Because they do not deserve the treatment that they're receiving.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
really...
overkill by Egypt. Not by Israel.
Yep. Appreciate the call, Infinite Content.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll talk next week. You all take it easy.
You too.
Yeah, it's definitely very scary what's going on in Israel. Really, genuinely sickening.
And
have we got our guest on?
Let's see here. No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
While we're waiting on our guest, I do want to lift up the UFCW put out a statement about the pharmacy walkouts that Infinite Content brought up. Because they actually represent some retail pharmacists. And so they put out a statement, in terms of the walkouts that are already happening and the ones that are going to be happening. And so, I wanted to just point that out. A lot of folks maybe aren't aware that there are some unionized pharmacy staff. And so this is a really, it's an interesting action. I know I used to be a customer at Walgreens. I could not continue to be a customer at Walgreens. It was unbearable. And you could tell how overworked the staff was. And it was a constantly rotating staff. And it was a never-ending cluster every month trying to get medication from them. And so I had to just leave. And I had been going there for years just because it was the closest place to my house. It was most convenient, right? And, so many of these pharmacists are going through it, and the staff are going through it. So shout out to them, and, appreciate Infinite Content bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, keep an eye on the Zoom. Let me know when Tom joins. But yeah, I can go ahead and start talking about what I was up to last week. The first thing was immediately, or the day after the show was over last week, I drove down to Montgomery at like 5 in the morning. Oh, it was terrible to fill a speaker spot at the Machinist State Council Convention, and one of their speakers canceled at the last minute, so they knew that I was relatively close and asked me, and the guy's quote was, "I know you've always got something to say, so you can." So he asked me to come down, and I worried about it for a while, and I decided that I would, and so I did. And it was well received. It seemed like I didn't have anybody tell me to, go F myself or anything like that.
Yeah, that's always good.
Yeah, that's always good. And had several people say they enjoyed it. Had a couple of people say that they want to try to get me to speak at different events and or their local union meeting. So we'll be looking forward to some of that follow up. But what I wanted to do with the speech was, and when he was asking me to speak, the guy who was booking it, he said, "Bring a fire and brimstone, bring some fire and brimstone." And I opened it by recounting that and saying that Rico probably didn't know this, but I grew up in a holiness church, and what people outside of North Alabama would recognize as Pentecostal. And so everybody laughed because I know how to. I've heard very many fire and brimstone sermons, but what I wanted to do was basically tie kind of the moment that we're in today to the eternal task of the labor movement, which is basically to organize, and to do that by showing how, we've got so much to be happy about, genuinely so much to be happy about as a labor movement in 2023. With what's gone on at UPS, at the Big Three, with the Teamsters, with UAW, all of these strikes, a bunch of people winning, record approval rating, 90% of Americans under the age of 30 approve of unions. Really, in many ways, a great time to be a unionist, but in many other ways, it is, we're depressingly at more of the same. We're still at a historical low point for unionization. The last year, 2022, was the lowest year ever for union density. We have never had fewer union members as a percentage of the working population than we did in 2022. Never, since we've been keeping records, right? Strikes are still, like I said, at a historical low. So far this year, only about 470,000 people have gone on strike, whereas between 1950 and 1980, at least 1 million people went on strike, sometimes as many as 4 million people, and that's when we had a population of about half of what we do today. And so then it is incumbent on the labor movement, and in particular, the people that go to these conventions, who are, by their nature, by virtue of the fact that their local has sent them to these conventions as delegates, or as delegates by virtue of their office, it is on them and on people like me, people like them, more than really anybody else, to turn the moment that we are in right now into a movement. Because if we don't, it's going to be so much more difficult if we, let all of these opportunities that we have right now slide. And so it's up to us to win the very best contracts that we can right now, and to use those contracts to go out and organize new shops and bring new workers into the labor movement. Because if we don't grow, we're going to die. And that is the task that we have right now. We can't let this moment slip away. We've got to make use of it. And that was kind of the point of my speech, and it was well received, appreciated that. And that theme was echoed in several of the speeches at the Alabama AFLCIO convention last week, which I went to. I was a delegate representing the Labor Council up here. They had several speakers. Sarah Nelson was there from the Association of Flight Attendants, Cecil Roberts from the United Mine Workers, Charles Clark from the National AFL-CIO, Stuart Applebaum from the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, and a lot of words about organization, the importance of organization, the importance of winning and being effective, and militancy. And so I am cautiously hopeful, somewhat hopeful, that a lot of the attendees will take those speeches back and try to actually have those speeches motivate them to do something different. Because if we keep doing the same thing that we've always been doing, we're never gonna build on this moment that we have right now. And I say cautiously because it's not uncommon actually, at these conventions to hear really rousing speeches calling for organization and militancy and fighting the boss and winning and all this kind of stuff. And then nothing ever really comes of it from the delegates. They don't really take it back to their locals and do anything with it. It doesn't move them to action beyond standing up and applauding in the convention hall. But like I said, when I was talking about my speech, we really are in a different moment for labor, and so hopefully the moment that we are in, combined with some of the calls to action that we heard at the convention from myself and from others, from other much more important labor leaders in the country, will spurn some of these folks to action, and including myself and Adam to do more and to bring more people into the struggle. Because, I said do more, but me and Adam can't really do more. The thing that we need to do, that I need to do, certainly, is to bring more people in and delegate some of the tasks that I have to other people for my own sanity so that I don't burn out. And this is going to be the same for all these other people because so much work gets left on so few people's laps. So it's for our sanity so that we don't burn out and we can continue serving the movement, but also for their own good, for the people that we delegate tasks to. It will help them, it will educate them, it will build them up, it will reproduce ourselves as leaders. So that's kind of some of the big things that I've been up to. There was an executive council meeting talking about organizing at the Alabama AFL-CIO that I thought was productive and useful. So looking forward to hopefully seeing some of that come to fruition, some of those exhortations to action.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate all that, and I was there with you for some of that as well. And but before we even get into that, I wanted to just let you know that Tom is in the Zoom, so we can talk about waging a good war. Really looking forward to that interview. And let's put a pin in that discussion because I definitely want to come back to your speech and to my thoughts about the AFL-CIO convention as well.
Yes. All right. So joining us now is Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Thomas Ricks, joining to talk about his book on military history, military strategy of the Civil Rights Movement. It is called Waging a Good War, A Military History of the Civil Rights Movement from 1954 to 1968. I do have to admit that I have not finished the book, but what I have read has been very intriguing. I very much will be finishing this, and there's a lot to learn. As in your introduction, as you're talking about, that this is that the military lens of the Civil Rights Movement is never really even recognized, much less kind of delved into in the depth that you have in this 300 some odd page book. And so looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate your time. Could you introduce yourself for the audience? Talk to us about some of
My name is Tom Ricks. I used to be a journalist. I'd say more I'm now a book author for the last decade or so. I think this book is the best book I've written. It's almost the sum of my knowledge. And it goes to exactly what you were just talking about at this the convention. As I was listening to you, I was thinking this is what the civil rights movement, the classical civil rights movement, was so good at. Not just exhorting people, not just inspiring them to action, but giving them the tools of action. Remember, what they would do is they say, when you get home, this is what you are going to do. This is how you can do it. They had very specific schools down at Dorchester, Georgia. They would say, this is how you make a long-distance phone call. This is how you talk to a racist sheriff about your First Amendment right to peacefully protest and to petition the government for change, that you have an absolute right to do that under the Constitution. What they did was teach confrontational nonviolence. I think it's a much better word than passive resistance. It wasn't passive at all. It was about grabbing the opposition, the enemy, by the lapels and not letting go. What's striking to me about it, it wasn't about mass numbers. They were inspired by Gandhi, who said he'd much rather have a small group of disciplined protesters than a large group of undisciplined ones. Remember Gandhi's Salt March, very famous in the 1930s. He marches to the sea against British imperialism and for Indian independence. It was less than 100 people. Now, crowds of 50,000 would meet them at certain places, come out to welcome them. But it was an incredibly small, disciplined force. And I think this goes to the labor movement today. The thought that, first of all, we have to be trained and well organized. Second, we have to be disciplined in everything we do. And third, we have to be sustainable. One of my favorite people in the entire civil rights movement is James Lawson, who trained a lot of people in Nashville, who went on to become kind of the working level leaders of the classical civil rights movement. People like John Lewis, James Bevel, Diane Nash. And he taught them the key to a successful protest movement is not one big demonstration, it's several intense, smaller demonstrations. What really terrifies the opposition is not the big one, it's the fact that you're coming back again tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So in a nutshell, what I'd say is the civil rights movement was not about passive resistance. It wasn't about bop me on the head, I don't care. It was, if you bop me on the head, I will be back tomorrow and I'll be back with another person. And if you bop us both in the head, on the third day, there'll be three of us. And day after day after day. I think Birmingham there in Alabama with you was the classic example of this. The big civil rights demonstrations there in the spring of 1963 filled the jails, overwhelmed the city, and imposed a cost on Birmingham that Birmingham is still paying. This confrontational nonviolence said, what we will do is impose cost on you that you cannot imagine. That you know how to use violence. The American power structure, the caste system, is fluent in the use of violence, but you don't understand nonviolence. You won't understand what we're doing, and ultimately, we will prevail without you ever understanding what we're doing.
You talked. There was a lot there, and talking about the importance of strategy and discipline, and I think that is the discipline and the knowledge of how to interact with police. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? When are we going to stop? Why are we doing it? This is all so absent from most of the protests that you're going to see today about basically any topic. Somebody, there was a call to come out to the courthouse, and so that's what people do. There's very, very little, if any, of this kind of preparation or idea about how we want to do what we want to do it, and evaluation after it's over about whether we met our goal. Right? We do some of this stuff in the labor movement, and I'm sure that you're familiar with, organizer trainings, and you mentioned role playing in the book, and I didn't realize that, they did this in the civil rights movement, but that's something that we do in our organizer trainings. We, pretend to be, scared workers, anti-union workers, antagonistic workers, passively supportive workers, and we're trying to move these people into our support base, up the ladder of engagement, so to speak. But all of that is kind of in the vein of strategy that is not really, you mentioned it's been kind of overlooked, and the way that it is parallel to strategies of war and military has been kind of overlooked. Why do you think that is, and what do you think actually diving into it like you have can teach protest movements today and the labor movement?
In my most cynical moments, I think that if you actually taught the civil rights movement accurately in American schools, it would lead to a political upheaval in this country that the power structure greatly fears. If you taught how they actually worked, how they thought, what they did, it would almost be an instruction manual in recreating a more progressive America. You mentioned strategy, and I think that's really key. In some ways, demonstrations were the least important aspect of the civil rights movement. And though I'm a former journalist, I do kind of blame the media for that, because that's what they focused on, the public manifestation. In many ways, the demonstration was the least important. The one thing you really don't want to do is have a big demonstration and not repeat it, not have a next step for people to follow through on. So strategy. I think the civil rights movement actually excelled in strategy and was and better at strategy than the U.S. military was. The U.S. military is very good tactically. They know how to fight. They know how to engage in a battle. But their leaders don't have a very good idea of strategy. What do you do after you get to Baghdad? What's the plan for the next day? And in fact, America's generals like Tommy Franks kind of shuffled that off and said that's someone else's problem. In fact, that is the key question for generals. And it was also the key question for early civil rights leaders as they trained and prepared and did this role playing and so on. The first question in strategy in the civil rights movement, and I think they were extremely good at this, was who are we? It sounds like such a basic question, but it's incredibly difficult. There's an old saying among military strategists, if you're not crying, you're not making strategy. Strategy is hard. So the question, who are we? Diane Nash, who was a young college dropout in Nashville, she moved into the YWCA, the segregated one for Black people in Nashville, to work full-time on civil rights. And the way she put it was, we are people who will no longer tolerate segregation. We will not live a segregated life. And people would respond to her, Diane, the South is segregated. What are you going to do about it? She said, that's their problem. I'm not going to live a segregated life anymore. What that meant was, we're going to walk into segregated lunch counters in downtown Nashville and ask for our lunch. And it was much more than being about a hamburger. It was saying, we will not live a segregated life. And from that flows a lot. As you see, from that flows tactics. Once you have your strategy right, tactics become much easier. Diane Nash, trained by James Lawson, after months of preparation, of role playing, of people where they'd sit in church basements and they would have, one group would be the protesters, the other people be people attacking them. To prepare for the sit-ins, they had coffee poured on them, chairs kicked out from underneath them, cigarettes put out on their backs. They went in well-trained, and the people who really did attack them did exactly that, but they were trained for it. They were prepared for it. They did not fight back. And this shocked America, and it shocked the South. Who are these kids who are not fighting back, who are doing something very different, who are speaking a language of nonviolence that flummoxes the power structure. And that inspired people to try to learn how to do that. Other people learned how to do sit-ins, and that leads directly to the freedom rides. A year later, Diane Nash, her then husband, James Bevel, are key in the freedom rides and saying, we're going to get on buses and ride through the segregated South and not obey the laws of segregation. And again, they did training, they did preparation. They actually sent out advanced scouts to reconnaissance the route to say, when you go to this bus station, the segregated white waiting room will be on your left and the segregated black waiting room will be on your right. Go in and take a left. Sit down in that room, black and white together. The preparation, the thinking through, it was almost as if the demonstration was irrelevant. By the time you went to the demonstration, you had a cadre of trained people who had talked through all this, who understood who they were, who trusted each other, and could go through the fight together. And then, as you say, sit down after it and said, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And what's the next step?
Right, right. And what do you think is gained by that last bit? What is the most important thing that is gained by actually, after an event or a demonstration or a sit-in, going back and seeing like, okay, how do we feel about that? Did we meet the goal? What are things we can improve on? What are things that we did well? Like, what is the benefit of that?
The benefit is you're able to change and adjust and improve and do better and do different. You constantly keep the opposition on the back foot. You're not predictable. They don't understand what you're doing. The assurances that the opposition have given their leaders in the power structure fall through. So Birmingham, spring of 1963 is a good example. Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, and Fred Shuttlesworth begin demonstrations in the spring of '63. The demonstrations actually are smaller than they expected in Birmingham. They're a little bit worried by it. And King ultimately calls in James Bevel. Bevel is a person who should be better known, a brilliant strategic thinker, a young Baptist minister training in Nashville, and also someone who was deeply imbued with the works of Gandhi. He had studied Gandhi closely, as James Lawson had. James Lawson actually had gone to India to study Gandhi's approach to demonstrations. So Martin Luther King calls up James Bevel and says, Bevel, I need you in Birmingham. Things aren't going well here. Bevel arrives and says, okay, here's the problem. In Birmingham, the adults are afraid to demonstrate, and for a good reason. You essentially have a totalitarian system here. The police will crack down on them, they will lose their jobs, and they will suffer economically, and they are already living on the edge here. So Bevel comes up with a different approach. He says, I'm going to recruit high school students and even younger elementary school students, and I'm going to fill the jails of Birmingham. And that imposes a cost on the city while not imposing a cost on the adults of Birmingham that we're asking to demonstrate who can't afford to do so. And Bevel is also innovative in how he recruits. He doesn't just go stand on street corners and say, hey, kid, you want to be a demonstrator? He goes to the two most popular DJs on black radio stations in Birmingham, Tall Paul and I think Shelley the Playboy. And he explains to them what they're doing and says, I want you to go on the radio and invite the student leaders, cheerleaders, presidents, club presidents, football captains, quarterbacks. Come on down to a lunch and I want to talk to those kids. And then he uses those kids to recruit more. And he finds the kids can't say, Mommy and Daddy, I'm going to a demonstration. Parents won't allow it. But if the kids say, I'm going to church, the parents can't stop it. You can't tell your kid not to go to church. So every night they're holding training sessions in church. And Martin Luther King comes back to Birmingham and says, Bevel, what have you been doing? And Bevel says, I'm ready to go on the street with hundreds of kids. And King doesn't believe it. He says, really? And he says, King says, show me. And so Bevel takes him into the 16th Street Church in Birmingham and says, this room is filled to the rafters. Kids, tell Dr. King, are you ready to demonstrate? Hold up your hand. And every single kid in the room holds up their hand. 1,000 kids maybe at that point. And King says, I can't believe it. And Bevel says, we're doing it. And they start marching out in cohorts. He has planned it. They have planned the route. They said, this group is going to go this many blocks. This group is going to go that many blocks. By 7 minutes, you're going to be at this spot. And they never almost make it to 7 minutes because they get arrested. Very soon, the jails of Birmingham are packed. And this has got the local police on the back foot. Bull Connor, the chief of security for the city of Birmingham, doesn't know what to do. And so he says, I can't arrest anybody more. I filled up the jails. I actually filled up the fairground outside Birmingham with more kids. And then more kids keep on marching and more. And Bull Connor makes a fateful decision. He, at that point, calls out the fire hoses and the police dogs and sets them on kids, some of them as young as 8 years old. Now, the city of Birmingham wasn't surprised by this. That's what you do, the city of Birmingham, the white power structure, had been assuring the rest of the country, don't worry, we know how to handle Black people. We're familiar with them. We grew up with them. And then the nation sees fire hoses and police dogs attacking children and says, if that's the way you handle Black people, if you handle what you call the colored problem, we're not buying it. We're not going to live with that. And this is a great strategic triumph for the civil rights movement, really brought about by James Bevel, considering the situation and saying, let's take a different route, a different step here, and preparing these kids for it. The kids knew exactly what to expect. There's a great interview I read with a woman, now quite old, who was 8 years old, being held by the police. And the police started asking her about communism and Marx. She said, we didn't talk about that stuff. We talked about our rights. This is preparation. The police were taken aback. These kids were serious. So there's a lot to learn just from how they think about it, the discipline with which they approach it, with which they think through strategy, and that leads to tactics, and they prepare their people tactically, give them the tools they need to carry out the tactics, and then move on to the next issue.
Why do you think it is? What was it that led them to come upon the tactic of nonviolence? All these demonstrations, it's all nonviolence and purposeful and aggressive and all of this, but it is all, that's kind of the marker of the civil rights movement, is that it's nonviolence. What was it that brought them to that?
Yeah, and I got to say, it's confrontational nonviolence. It was a way of dealing with a very violent system. And this was the problem, especially in the South, but across America. The American power structure is fluent in the use of violence. You had to find a different way to confront it than with violence. And Gandhi was a very inspiring example. They looked to Gandhi. They learned a lot from Gandhi. I think the key bridge was the Black church, the Black Baptist church in the South especially. The Black church had not been active in civil rights. But looking at Gandhi, could say, yes, there's a religious aspect here that we can possess, we can own. And the Black church steps up in the late 40s and early 50s in the South in a way it had not before. And I think this is probably the historical accident of World War II. Ralph Abernathy was a World War II veteran. Medgar Evers was a World War II veteran. Somebody who should be better known, Amzie Moore, a brilliant resistance leader in Mississippi, was another veteran of World War II. And so I think they saw that the military structure was useful. They saw the Black church was now willing to enter into this, this area for the first time, to push the issue of civil rights. And the moment came together with this generation of young people. 1 million Black Americans had served in the armed services in World War II, most of them from the South. And they were ready, they were willing, and yes, they also could resort to violence. One place down south of Nashville, Columbia, Tennessee, right after World War II, had some violent confrontations, and the police there were shocked that the young black men there, almost all of them veterans, knew how to use firearms, knew how to fight in a combat formation, and were willing to do so to protect their neighborhoods.
And if you had, all of this is really, like you mentioned at the start of the interview, this is all really understudied and understood. Especially in the schoolhouse telling of the civil rights movement. In particular, the thing that I think of most as kind of the archetypal example is Rosa Parks. It was just spontaneous. She was tired, no other reason. And then spontaneously, additionally, everybody came out and supported her in the Montgomery bus boycott. And this was all spontaneous, right? And you said that, you think that if people actually understood how this all happened, then it would better prepare people to create a better world themselves. And that may be why, we don't teach it that way. If you were able to teach, if you were able to import into the lesson plans of a U.S. history teacher, the real, actual, accurate beginning to end telling of a certain episode in the civil rights movement, what would it be and why?
Well, there's actually a good example of this was the Freedom Schools in Freedom Summer, Mississippi, 1964, when they actually went in and taught black kids their rights, which was actually illegal to teach to black kids. They also taught them foreign languages because foreign languages were not taught in any black schools in Mississippi. They basically liberated these kids. One of the Freedom Schools did something I love. They studied the Declaration of Independence, and then the teacher said, why don't you write your own declaration? And they did. It was a Declaration of Independence from segregated Mississippi. They said, we have a right to have police protect us instead of beating us. We have a right to pave streets in our neighborhood. We pay taxes, and that should pay for some asphalt around here. We have, most of all, have a right to vote. This was not something that was told black people in the South. Fannie Lou Hamer famously said she didn't know she had the right to vote until I think it was James Bevel and a couple of other civil rights workers came by and said, you really do have the right to vote. And she said, well, it's hard enough to register here, let alone vote. But that really did bring about change. I think the key thing that isn't taught is how effective the civil rights movement was. It really did change things. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way these days. I think this nation is going through a horrible time. I wake up every morning just stunned by the situation we're in. Yes, there are some bright lights. I was really pleased and surprised to see the UAW work so successfully in its strikes and in a targeted, thoughtful, careful way achieve their goals. But the civil rights movement, it's not taught how they did what they did. Rosa Parks is a great example. The way the civil rights movement is taught, the summary that goes is Rosa Parks sat down, Martin Luther King stood up, and the civil rights movement was won. Well, that neglects the years of thoughtful preparation and organization that went into it every damn step of the way. Rosa Parks is a great example. Before she made her demonstration on a Birmingham Montgomery city bus, she actually had gone to the Highlander School, a great labor and civil rights school in the hills of Tennessee. And she had sat down with a woman named Septima Clark, another great organizer. Septima Clark was the daughter of a slave in South Carolina, had become a school teacher, and then lost her job for the crime of belonging to the NAACP. She's working at the Highlander School. She meets with Rosa Parks. They talk about the situation in Montgomery. The first question she asked Rosa Parks at the beginning of the week is, what do you want to do? And they work for a week and talk for a week. And at the end of the week of thinking about organizing and preparation and self-discipline, Septima Clark poses a second question to Rosa Parks. What are you going to do? And that's where the Montgomery bus boycott begins. It begins in Rosa Parks' mind with her decision about what she is going to do. And then the great organization that enables the Montgomery bus boycott to go on for over a year. All of it to make it sustainable and to impose cost on the opposition that the opposition doesn't understand at the time and is unable to respond to. That's the key to how these things work. Everybody knows what the civil rights movement did, they think. Few people know how they did it. And that's what I tried to talk about in this book. How did the civil rights movement actually do what it did?
I'm interested in what you think of today's social movements. I mentioned today that it seems to me that, all of this, the tactics and the discipline and the strategy is just really not there by and large. But I'm interested in your analysis.
I've come away thinking, really inspired by studying James Lawson, is that the worst thing you can do is have a big demonstration, everybody pat each other on the back and go home. The size of a demonstration doesn't matter. The sustainability of a demonstration is what matters. The fact that you can do it again and again and again. I think sometimes all a big demonstration do is blow off steam, and that's the worst thing, because the opposition has seen the worst you can do, and they shrug it off and they go back to doing whatever they're doing, and they're not going to change. You're going to bring about change by sitting down in quiet rooms and talking about who you are, what you want to do. First, defining yourself, and then going out and thinking about a long-term approach to achieving that. And I keep on going back to what Diane Nash said. She defines herself and her group as people who will no longer tolerate segregation. And when she's told, they're going to kill you, she said, well, that's, we understand that. But that's not our problem. That's their problem. We are not going to live with what they're telling us we have to live with. And I think once you make that decision that you are going to define yourself, I think that's so key, not to let other people define you. I got to say, I'm guilty of a little definition here. When you guys came on your show, I was just surprised to see two young people. I am so accustomed to thinking of labor organizers as old guys like me. I think it's good to see young people. And I think it's also good if the labor movement is democratic in that it holds elections and has turnover. I remember the first contract that I ever had as a union member, they screwed the younger people by preserving the wages of the older people. Now, I know why those old guys wanted to keep their wages, but they made a deal basically on the backs of guys like me in our 20s. That's why it's important that the labor movement also be democratic and have votes that allow change and interchange and new leaders to emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that and appreciate your comment as well. And I just, I think there's a lot of lessons that we can take regardless of what movement background that you're coming from, but, whether it's labor or elsewhere, I think there's a lot of lessons we can really take from this and learn from this history. And I really appreciate your strategic focus here because that's the sort of, thinking that we have to actually make a difference. And, some of us do believe that we do need to make a difference. And we're not going to do it unless we do it, right? So really appreciate that. Sorry, Jacob, didn't mean to intervene, but...
Actually, I want to intervene here. One last thing I want to say. Every book you write, after you finish the book, you start having regrets. You realize things that I should have emphasized more. One thing I really should have emphasized more in this book was the key role of organized labor in supporting the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King and the people around him, Andrew Young, Ralph Abernathy, SNCC, they had two key sources of money. Basically, Hollywood, Harry Belafonte became the conduit for collecting money in Hollywood, and actually sometimes flying with a briefcase full of cash to Selma or Montgomery or Birmingham and handing it over so they could go out and buy food for people who were demonstrating. The other was the unions. UAW, several other unions, electrical workers, were very dependable. AFSCME, the government workers in New York City, very dependable in supporting and helping the civil rights movement at key times. And that's something I wish I'd written more about. There's a whole book to be written on the financing of the civil rights movement, how it worked, how important it was, and labor, organized labor, played an important and even revolutionary role in that.
I think that's really interesting, and I definitely think that's a history that we have to remember because, labor has its own very mixed history when it comes to issues of race, when it comes to issues of gender and just justice more broadly. And so it's worth really lifting up where labor has gotten it right and was on the right side of history and used its power for the greater good. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yep. Thomas Ricks, author of Waging a Good War, How the Civil Rights Movement Won Its Battles. Really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you'd want to leave our audience with before we let you go?
No, but hang in there. I think this country's going through a weird time. I never expected it. Boy, has my generation screwed it up. I think it's time for people in their 20s to take over this country. I would recommend, if you haven't already, get Representative Justin Jones in Nashville on your show. I spoke with him in Nashville last year before he became famous, actually, before he'd taken office. And it was one of the best moments that made going out on book tour worthwhile. One thing that really struck me is Justin Jones had studied these issues of organization. He's using them today. He's the guy who, when he walked in, they kicked him out of the legislature twice because he says things that the guys don't like. After the school shootings outside Nashville, he didn't say anything. He walked into the state legislature holding a baby's coffin. That was a striking moment. This is a guy who understands the moment and how to respond. At the end of our meeting where we spoke to people at the Nashville Public Library, I was really struck. Justin Jones stood up and said, "Would you join me in singing?" And he sang, "We Shall Overcome."
I love it.
Yeah. And we actually have something that we're working on for a couple of weeks from now that we actually had him on the list to reach out to. So we may be able to get him on the show. And I was first introduced to him in 2018 when I heard him open for Nina Turner at a rally. So yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with him as well, even before he kind of became something of a national sensation. So,
well, I'd say good luck and hang in there, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate your time. All right, folks. Like I said, Thomas Ricks, Waging a Good War, How the Civil Rights Movement Won Its Battles. It is an analysis of military strategy in the civil rights movement. Check it out. It's good. I'm looking forward to finishing it, and I know that once I finish it, I'm going to have a few questions that that I'm going to wish I had asked, but that's just the way that it goes.
Yeah, I really have enjoyed it so far, and enjoyed the conversation with Tom. And I just, I think the more we in this movement can think strategically and look at what works and what doesn't work, and what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right, I think, we just have to be doing that because labor has been encircled. Labor has been on a 50-year decline. That's not acceptable, and we see it in the conditions that are faced by working class people in this country, and particularly here in the South. It is not acceptable. We can't keep getting those results. So yeah, I think it's a very timely book. I think it's something worth studying, and the more we can realize what works in social movements and what's effective, the better we'll be, because we have to make positive change in this country. It's long overdue.
Yep, absolutely. So like I said, we are, last I understand, slated to go on Saturdays in the Shoals here at about noon o'clock. So let's go ahead and dial in, and bear with us, folks. We may have a little bit of quiet time potentially. I don't know. We may just jump right on the air, but we may have a little bit of quiet time before we actually get on, or have a little bit of production type stuff. So yeah, you've got the number, right, Adam?
Yes, I am calling the number. I'm not sure how I will know if they're answering.
I think you hear them answer. Is how I remember it happening.
Thank you for calling WZZA. Please listen for the following offices: for promotions and front desk. For the general manager, dial 11. For sales and news desk.
Do you have a keypad?
Oh, not on call in studio. Okay, that we'll have to try again. We're gonna have to try a backup method, Jacob, because call in studio. I don't think that's gonna go through for us.
Well, it just depends on. It's gonna just depend on if we get the right number. I think if we get that may not be the right number. Let's go to a break really quick.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, WZZA. May I help you?
Hey, this is Jacob Morrison with the Valley Labor Report, calling in for Saturdays in the Shoals.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Give me 30 seconds.
Okay, great. All right, folks, I believe that was Tori Bailey, host of Saturdays in the Shoals. So we're going to be on with her in just a second. Hang tight. Appreciate everybody in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And appreciate WZZA. We've been on the air there for, how long now?
2 years? I think 2 years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I love that we're out there in Northwest Alabama, which is, of course, a union stronghold in some ways. Quite a few building trades unions out there in that area.
It's where Jimmy Carter started his presidential campaign.
I messed around and caught a cold, and so I'm knitted up now.
No.
So I won't sound all nasally on the radio. Trying not to anyway.
No worries.
Okay, so are we ready?
I am.
Okay. In 5, 4, 3, 2. Hello, everyone. It's time for Saturday in the Shoals, and I am so fortunate I have Jacob Morrison on the line with Valley Labor Report. I have been looking forward to this conversation. I listen every week when they're doing all this conversation, all this talk about labor and rights and unions and workers and the value of workers and being appreciated and being paid for what we do and all that kind of thing. And I I'm on the sideline going, yeah, that's right, and saying things like that. So I have an opportunity to talk with you this time and to be able to interact with you. So thank you very much for agreeing to take some time out of your Saturday to have this conversation with me live and in person. Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. I also have with me Adam Keller, and we are what we do with our show is we have a whole second half of the program where we are online only, and so we're just we're calling in from the second half of our show, streaming this to YouTube as well. So so yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate your interest and your partnership over the last. I think we've been on WZZA for about 2 years now, or a year and a half. It's been a while.
You have, yeah. 21.
So definitely appreciate it and look forward to staying on WZZA for a long time to come.
All right. So now let me try to sound more professional. Okay. I'll just be honest with you guys. Everybody, I am on medication, so if I sound crazy, I'm going to blame it on the meds. But I'm really happy to have this conversation because it's been a long time coming. You've talked about strikes. You've talked about Amazon. You've talked about what has been happening not just around the state of Alabama, but across the nation. We've seen. I don't remember ever in our history us seeing a sitting president walk the line with workers who are demanding to be treated fairly. I applaud President Joseph Biden for doing that. I'm seeing some attention being paid to workers that we haven't seen in a while. For a while, it seemed as though there was this trickle down, all the rising tide will lift all ships kind of mentality going, and it didn't really trickle down to the average worker. So the middle class was being squeezed from both ends. And I'm seeing now a bit of a shift. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be really difficult. I mean, I think even opponents of labor recognize that this is a shift. And we've seen, in the business press, CEOs of major corporations really, running around kind of like a chicken with their head cut off, wondering about what to do about the moment that we're in, where, labor has close to a record approval rating. We have about unions, something like 70% of the American public have a positive view of unions. 90% of people under the age of 30, unions are, going on strikes more than we have in a long time, even though it's, compared to before 1980, still relatively low, but winning big things. The lowest paid workers at UPS are going to be getting a 50% raise over the life of the contract. Current temporary workers at Ford, with that tentative agreement that they just announced last week, if the members ratify that, they're going to be getting a 150% raise over the course of the contract.
Wow.
Second-tier workers at Ford are going to be getting an 85% raise immediately if this contract is ratified. A lot of, public opinion is definitely in labor's favor. Labor is doing a lot to win. But, we still have a long way to go to turn this into something more sustainable. We still only about 1 in 10 Americans are represented by unions, down from a high of 1 in 3, and that is really where we get our power from. The more people that join the labor movement and are a part of unions, the better that it is for everybody. And so there's a lot of work to do, but we're really in a pretty unique moment in my lifetime, certainly.
Well, one of the reasons that WZZA is so proud to be able to share with our listeners the knowledge that you guys drop every week is because we feel it's so important to educate the average person out there. We need to let everybody understand why it is that they want people who make things, who sweat, who roll up their sleeves and actually do the work, to be compensated for the time that they spend. We have been there's been this tendency to make rich people richer, and this money is going offshore somewhere. It's not being reinvested in our communities. But you have people say, well, wait a minute, I can't believe they want what did you say, 150% raise? That's outrageous. We need to explain why it is that it's important to see that the workers are paid fairly for their labor. Explain that, if you will.
Yeah, well, it's super easy to explain that 150% raise for the temporary workers, because the temporary workers are making like $15 to $17 to $18 an hour at Ford, and that's how, there's really been a division in so many even union shops between legacy employees who have been there before. In particular, a big cutoff point was the Great Recession in 2008. If you started working at Ford before then, you're doing pretty well even now. You're having to work a lot more than you should have, frankly. But people that have started working after that, and certainly that have started working there recently and they're temporary employees, they're being just completely abused by this massively profitable company. Hiring somebody as Ford.
It's different. Yeah, you're right. It's different if you got a small company that maybe can't afford to pay large wages. But if you've got a company they're making all kinds of profits, but not sharing them with the people who are helping them make the profits, it's vastly unfair. And I want us to do a better job, I guess, of explaining to the people out there who are shopping. They're spending money. They are supporting these businesses. They need to understand why it is that we need to work in solidarity with one another. So if you will, explain what a living wage is.
Well,
because somebody might hear you say, "Wait, $17, $18 an hour? That's more than minimum wage. Minimum wage is only $7.50 or $7.25, right? $7.25.
Right.
So, explain what a livable wage is. A living wage.
Yeah, well, you started with with an allusion to the consumer, and this is something that employers really want to try to do. They want to try to get working Americans, working class people, to think of themselves as consumers instead of as members of the working class, and that's something that we really want to push back against, because you are in some ways a consumer, but more than that, you're a member of the working class, and that's how. That's your power base and how you can kind of affect change in society. And these are the people that you should have solidarity with. And most of the times, labor makes up a very small percentage of the product price. And so if you look at Ford, that's what we've been talking about, less than 7% of the cost of the vehicle. You go to a dealership, you pay $70,000, $80,000 for outrageous price for one of these huge vehicles. Only 7% of that goes to labor. And so
Wait. I want to make sure nobody missed that, because there was this. I read an article, and I want to say it was one of the Fords himself who said something. Oh, I hope we can come to an agreement. We don't want prices to go up for the consumer. We don't want people to have to pay more for their cars just to accommodate these outrageous wages that these folks are asking for. You said 7%. I don't think the average. I didn't know that. I bet the average person doesn't know that.
Yeah, less than 7% actually, and that's what they want to do, right? And because the cost, the UAW in their live stream, Sean Fain, every week has been doing a really good job of educating the people that are listening about how, even if you're not a UAW member, your fight is much more, your interests are much more aligned with the UAW than with Ford. Prices at Ford have increased in the past 4 years, since 2019, which is when they got their last contract. Prices have increased 40% for their cars. Wages have increased 6%, right?
Wait a minute, though, Jacob. Wait a minute. We had COVID. They couldn't get the parts. That's why the prices went up. That's the excuse. That's what I've heard. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Part of it certainly is, but we can look at analysis. All of the analysis basically at this point is showing that 50% of the increase in prices has gone not towards higher wages in a more competitive labor market, not towards increased material costs or the supply chain stuff, but just directly to corporate profits. And the big three, and that's indicative in the big three, they have paid more to shareholders over the last 4 years than they did to UAW members. Like, think about that.
That's why your voice is so important. We need to understand that, and we need to be able to have these conversations in the grocery stores, in the barbershops, in the beauty salons. We need to be able to explain it so people don't think that workers are being greedy, because they're not. They're only
Absolutely, and you think, and you know, people think of that. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And you know, people think of UAW members, and they think of typically, you know, the legacy employees who do, you know, to be fair, have it relatively well off compared to some people, at least, you know, making $32 an hour or so. You know, that's a reasonable wage. I think $30 an hour. You're starting to get towards this is a respectable,
most
livable
people are pretty
wage.
happy with that.
Most people are happy with that. And even at these companies, at Ford, the CEO makes 300 times, not the lowest paid worker, the median worker, right? And then, you know, people say, and so the retort to that is that, okay, look, even if you got rid of his entire $21 million salary, you're, you know, if you distribute that across the 50,000 Ford employees, that's not going to be very much per employee, and that's fair enough. But he is surrounded by a horde of executives who similarly make salaries in the millions of dollars, and they are surrounded by hordes of shareholders who, like I just said, got more money from the company than the workers did, just because they own part of the company, right? Because they have money. And that's the you know, that's really the divide in society. The people who, you know, the people who work and the people who don't, right?
So if we were to try to create a new movement, and I'd like to see us do that, I've always felt that we should be more economically aligned, or as economically aligned as racially aligned. I think that there are times when we are divided and conquered on purpose, that there are these little bombs that get tossed into the crowd, and it's intended to distract us from what's happening. If we stop to think about it, we have way more in common, way more that aligns us than we know, and we really should be working in a concerted effort against those people who do not have our best interests at heart. So to that end, I would like to make sure that we are explaining our stances to the folks who should be thinking the way we do. And I want to make sure that we are having more of these kinds of conversations so that we can just make sure that people are clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. How do you feel about collective bargaining when it comes to maybe not shopping at a certain place until, you know, do we get the average citizen involved? You know, you're saying let's call them working class, not consumers. I'm saying that they're both. Do we say, hey, I'm a member of the working class, but they're not treating me fairly, so we're not going to shop with this person anymore. We're not going to buy this particular brand anymore until we get them to be more reasonable in their negotiation with us. Should we be doing more of that? Should we be boycotting?
Yeah, that's a great question of strategy. And by and large, when boycotts are not, you know, organized by the people that are affected, it is honest. It is more of the same as far as thinking of yourself as a consumer. How can I consume differently to make the world better? How can my consumer choices change the world? And that's just frankly, you know, not going to do it. That's not going to cut it. As a you're not going to change the world because you bought you know, this type of pizza versus that type of pizza. Now that as an individual, right? And now there are certain instances where boycotts can be effective, but they have to be organized. And we actually just finished a conversation with Thomas Ricks, who wrote a book, Waging a Good War, about how much military strategy and tactics were used in the civil rights movement. And, you know, and so boycotts were obviously a big part of the civil rights movement, but they were not instituted because somebody got on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC and said, hey, let's all do this or not do this. it was because people in the community who were affected by the thing said, we're all going to do this or not do this together. And then on top of that, there was the peer pressure against folks who did not abide by the community's what the community had decided to do. Right?
Yeah.
So people who rode the bus in Montgomery during the boycott, there was some amount of coercion in the form of, ostracization or
we'll shame you into doing the right thing. How dare you break the line here? How dare you go?
Absolutely.
And you see us all out here trying to accomplish something as a collective. So I think there needs to be. Go ahead.
Oh no, and so when there is a strike or something like that, like at a grocery store, a lot of Krogers, for instance, are unionized with the UFCW. So if the Kroger in your area goes on strike, and you've got and the workers have a picket line in front of the business, absolutely you should turn around and go somewhere else, even if it means going to a Walmart. And now you may think, well, that's strange because the Walmart, their labor practices are not at the, typically they would maybe even be considered worse than Kroger's. But the people that are being affected are asking you to do this. And it is a very easy thing to turn around and go and do something else. So I'm not one to, individually think about, you tally up, human scores and, is this company that much better, or do they, whatever. I go by what the people that are affected ask me to do. And so when workers are on strike and they ask for a boycott, I'll boycott. But other than that,
at the end of the day, if we change one company at a time, we're making a difference. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So wait a minute. Adam, you're on here too.
I am.
Weigh in. Weigh in. What do you think about the effectiveness of selective purchasing?
Yeah, I agree with Jacob there in that it has to be part of a broader strategy, and I also agree in terms of, is it the demands of the impacted folks? So I think, with a workers' picket line in a strike situation, it's very obvious, whose side you can be on. And it's, as Jacob said, it's an easy ask. I think boycotts is something that we do need to look at as a movement, I think more holistically though, personally, because as you said, we are both consumers and workers. And so basically corporate America depends on us in both of those capacities, right? Our purchasing power as consumers definitely floats this economy. So I do think there has to be more strategic alignment in how we use our limited incomes and how it aligns with our broader strategies as a movement. And so that's where I think I would love to see more of labor getting into alternative sources of wealth and looking at new types of businesses that we could go to beyond simply relying on corporate America. I think that's the toughest part, though, about a boycott is, and this speaks to, I think, a lot of the tough choices that so many of us face in this economy, is that, for a lot of us, you're limited in what options you have, right? There may only be a Walmart. That may be the only place in town. Dollar General may be your only option in rural Alabama. And so we may know that Dollar General has terrible worker safety practices and terrible labor practices. We may know that they're kind of ripping us off as consumers. But then, what else do we do? And so I think that's a generational issue that we're dealing with now in a way that maybe we didn't deal with as much 100 years ago when folks had more sustainable communities. Right, where we could feed each other, we could look after each other's kids.
I think that's actually it. We feed each other, we help each other, and you and Jacob were both right in that we have to look at it more realistically and holistically. We have to figure out a way to make it work, and we can't be haphazard about any of these movements that we involve ourselves in. I'm thinking that maybe, I remember when I was in high school, I remember I'd read a report in my economics textbook, and it was talking about how in some urban communities the prices were higher. Maybe the quality of produce at a grocery store was lower. And I decided to check, and there was I'm going to just call them out. There was a company, the Wilson brothers owned Wilson food stores or grocery stores. They had several of them in several different parts of town. And there was one particular one that was in my neighborhood. Here I am in the black neighborhood, and I'm going in looking and comparing the price for a loaf of bread or a head of lettuce, and I'm noticing that it's higher in this part of town than it is over across town at the other store in the other neighborhood. And I asked one of the Wilsons, Mr. Wilson, why is it that it's more expensive here? And he came up with some excuse that didn't make a lot of sense, and it made me so mad. And I'm in high school. I stopped shopping at the grocery store in my neighborhood, and I started driving 5 miles just to get to the nearest grocery store because I was determined. And I know my action didn't make a big a ripple in the overall pool. I know it didn't, but it felt good to me. I felt that I was making a difference, and I told people this is why I refuse to go to the store around the corner, because they charge us more. I think that if we did more of these conversations, that more people would get on board, and then we do make much more of an impact. But that is exactly what Jacob's saying. We gotta make sure that we're being smart about it. We've got to make sure that we are communicating with one another and that we're acting as a collective instead of individually. All these individual fights aren't as impactful as if we all ball up our fists together. I want to know something. I know that you guys have touched on it. You've talked about it at length, as a matter of fact, but for somebody new who may be listening today, can you bring us up to speed on what happened with and what is now happening with Amazon?
Sure. So the here in Alabama, the latest is that there is a hearing scheduled for January. So you'll remember about a year and a half ago, there was a second election at the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer where and there was a second election because it had to the federal government ruled that it had to be rerun because Amazon had broken the law too much in the first election and interfered in the election too much by by really intimidating illegally the employees there into voting no. And so, the NLRB said, the National Labor Relations Board said that couldn't have been a fair election. There was too much coercion and retaliation and all of this kind of stuff. So you got to do it again. So that's what they did. And the second election, I think it was in March or April of 23, it ended again in a loss, but much closer this time. Much closer the second time. I think it was 900 no to 700 some odd yes. So 55-45, I think, was the split. And then there are 400 challenged ballots. And so during the election process, during the election process, it was a mail-in election. Once they got all of the, when you get all the mail-in ballots in, you basically take a look at the ballot and you look at the name on the envelope. They've got a secret ballot envelope inside of that, but first you got to validate, is this person a legitimate voter, right? So I look at, Lou Sally, and I say, Lou was not an employee during the election period. He can't vote. So, his vote is now challenged. His vote goes into the challenged bucket. And so they set aside all of the challenged ballots. The union and the employer both have the ability to challenge votes, challenge the eligibility of the voter. And so there's 400 of those, and they haven't been investigated yet. They're being investigated now. as to whether or not these voters were eligible. And there's supposed to be a hearing in January determining the status of these ballots and whether or not they'll be counted, and then counting the challenged ballots. So the challenged ballots could theoretically change the election and turn it into a win for the Union, but it is also possible and probably more likely that it does not change the change the status of the election, in which case it is possible that there could be a third run of the election because, like in the first time, Amazon again violated the National Labor Relations Act with respect to their employees' right to vote however they wish in a union election. And so the union has filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, and it's possible that, and that's another thing that the hearing in January is supposed to rule on, is whether or not the election needs to be rerun. So still kind of up in the air. And, another story about that is important for folks to understand is that, you might ask, why the heck is it taking so long to do this? Right. And that's because the National Labor Relations Board is just criminally underfunded. They have been basically flat funded since 2014. They got something like an 8% increase in the budget last year, but that doesn't even keep them up with where they were at the beginning of the pandemic before all this huge inflation set in. And so the National Labor Relations Board, I think at this point, has half the staff that it did 20 years ago, and they have more elections and a bigger workforce that they're supposed to be overseeing. And so you can imagine that makes it difficult. There's a long line of stuff going on that they've got to investigate, elections that they have to hold, and that's the way that, Republicans and their corporate donors want it, right? So, and so that's what's happening in Alabama. We of course know that the Amazon Labor Union, an independent union, won a union election, the first ever victorious union election at an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York. Since then, they lost a second election in Albany, and there have not been any other Amazon elections that I'm aware of, I don't think. And so we're kind of in a limbo right now with the fight at Amazon, but as far as results or seeing any movement or anything like that, there are some Amazon delivery drivers out in California that are on strike. But Amazon is very good at, scaring people into, not unionizing.
I'm wondering, Jacob, if the threat of these votes and the fact that the difference has reduced, and now you're looking at 55-45, so it's pretty close, is the threat of this union causing Amazon to change any of their practices and get better?
So one of the things
are they reacting in any way positively?
Yeah, some of the employees down in Bessemer in Alabama told us that they were actually no votes in the first one and then yes votes in the second election because of because nothing has changed, actually. They were told during the first election that, you give us another chance, right? Give us another chance. It's like an abusive spouse. Give me one more chance and you won't be sorry. And so several people voted no, and then, nothing changed, more or less. And so that, across the country, there have certainly not been any big changes to the working conditions of Amazon employees. They're still, by and large, making between $15 and $20 an hour, which is just not, that's fine for like a high school student or a college student, right? If that's your first job and you just want a little extra spending money or whatever, you don't have rent to pay, you live at home. But, if you're an adult, you've got to pay rent. God forbid you have a family. 20 an hour, 15 an hour is just, it's not enough. Certainly without a pension or good health care. And so, and that's why, there's so much discontent.
All right. So now I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. So for small businesses who are struggling just to survive, because we don't get the same incentives that large corporations do. We don't get those tax breaks. We don't get, all of these wonderful things that the government will do for, and I don't mean just the state government. I'm talking about city government. I'm talking about county government will do for these larger corporations because they're supposed to be job creators and whatever. But small businesses that are just trying to survive. How does what you do, in terms of advocating for workers' rights, how does that affect small businesses?
I think it affects them in the sense that I think that any worker has the right and deserves a union and collective bargaining and all of that kind of stuff. And I say all the time that employees do not want to destroy the businesses that they work for. That would not even make sense from a self-interested perspective.
Counterproductive, yeah.
They want it to be sustainable, but they want it to do everything that it can to have a good living for the workers that work there. And so one of the things that you'll during the collective bargaining process that employers have to do under the National Labor Relations Act. And this is another thing, actually. The National Labor Relations Act does not apply to businesses, does not apply to retail businesses if they have a gross annual income volume of business less than $500,000. So if you're a very small business, you're actually exempt from the NLRA, which I personally would disagree with. I think that anybody, if you employ somebody, then you should have to follow the rules as far as it, especially as it relates to a person's union rights. But, during the collective bargaining process, what employers have to do is they have to reveal their books where the information is relevant. And if you actually, as a small business owner, or even as a large business owner, if you're able to actually make the case persuasively that this particular thing you're asking for, employees, is not sustainable for us as a business, we will go under, then virtually in all cases, the employees will accept that and they'll not go after that as long as there's a good faith effort being made by the employer and being shown by the employer. And that's in fact what unions have done time and time again. In particular, we've been talking about the UAW and the Big Three. The UAW is blamed amazingly for the collapse of the auto industry, when in fact the UAW is responsible in large part for saving it because they were willing to take huge cuts to their pay, to their pensions, to their health care. They lost billions of dollars in compensation to save, on top of the taxpayers giving billions of dollars to the auto industry. And so, because the members of the UAW and the leadership saw the books and they saw that, you actually really do need us to take something of a hit. And so we will, because we want the company to survive. And so, that's what workers are willing to do to keep their businesses afloat. And because they,
I'm going to agree with that, because I know that my team here is wanting to do the best thing for the overall business because they understand how important it is. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I want to talk about AI. I want to know what your thoughts are about what's going on in Hollywood, what has been, what still is, and whether AI is going to be a factor in, is it something that we need to be concerned about as laborers across the board? Are we going to lose jobs to artificial intelligence?
I think that, it's difficult to say exactly how much of an impact a technology is going to have before it has the impact, but I think that almost certainly there's going to be some amount of automation with AI, and there's going to be some amount of hours of labor needed lost, right? You're going to need some amount of hours less of labor to create certain products. I think that's virtually inevitable, and I think as far as predictions go, that's one that I'm comfortable making. And so the only question for that is who is the beneficiary of it?
Right.
Labor has been typically self-interestedly just opposed to automation in general. You know, they fight automation because they see rightly that it's going to result in job losses. But it doesn't have to be that way. It could be that, you know, if automation saves 10% of the time it's needed to create a widget, then the workers could create more widgets. Do what?
They could make more widgets.
Well, they could create more widgets, or they could retain the same salary and work less, right? Because you know, I mean, that's another option, instead of it being the case that all of the productivity gains are taken by the people at the top. You know, I mean, it just doesn't have to be that way, and so we could bargain it. We could bargain shorter work weeks in our contracts. That's something that the UAW has kind of put out there as an idea, and is something that people in Europe have fought for and won. 35-hour work weeks in many industries in Germany and France.
Yeah, I like that. Now we've improved the quality of life.
Exactly. We're improving the quality of life. We are giving more people more freedom. And the company is still making the same amount of revenue. I'm still making the same amount of money. It should be a win-win, but that's only if we are able to you know, force that concession at the bargaining table. Because of course, if left up to their own devices, they're going to take all of the extra profits, and they're not going to give us any. Exactly. And so we've got to make sure that we've got the power to force those concessions.
All right, but that means that we have to stay on top of it. We have to be as aware of what's coming down the pike as we possibly can. So we depend on you for that. We need to know what we need to be thinking about, what we need to be fighting for, what we need to be talking to our legislators about, our congressmen and women about. So thank you for staying on top of it and making sure that we're on top of it too. Really appreciate what you do. Is there something else that you know of that we need to be thinking about, we who are out here as part of the working class, and we who are out here as consumers? What do we need to be thinking about, worried about, concerned about, working toward? If you had a magic wand, what would you make us do next?
Well, I mean, the magic wand, I would think that I would encourage people to do is to form a union in your workplace. You know, the thing that I, you know, one of the things that I've always found very persuasive is that, you know, if we in America have, you know, a very strong kind of democratic small d ethos. And so, you know, when we see politicians, you know, we think that, you know, we should have a say in what they do and what our country does and what our government does. And yet, for the majority of our waking lives, when we clock into work, we clock out of our rights as a citizen. We give up all of the freedoms that we have as a citizen of the United States, and we enter into what is in many ways, you know, like a dictatorship. And what unions do is they inject some amount of democracy into that relationship and give workers some amount of say in what goes on, and I think that's something that we all deserve. We all deserve a say in what happens in our life and things that affect us. And then by doing that, by unionizing your workplace and hopefully getting a good contract, then you become part of a movement that has been at the center of every freedom struggle in the last 150 years in the United States. And you can utilize your power in the community to do even more for even more people. So yeah, join a union.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in there to say that I think, you know, when everyday people come together and unite around our common interests, we can really do amazing things. And so that's what I would encourage folks, is to always be organizing, to be having conversations with folks and building relationships built in solidarity with folks. And, you know, be willing to fight for someone you don't even know. Be willing to show up for folks, and recognize that an injury to one is an injury to all. Because personally, I do believe that a better Alabama really is possible. I think interracial people power is the way we're going to get there. The vast majority of us are working class. The working class is the most diverse class. And as you pointed out earlier, Tori, There's been a lot spent to divide and conquer everyday working people, whether it's along race or gender, religion, nationality, so many ways in which they try to divide us and keep us apart. But we really do have a lot in common because we all want a life of respect and dignity. We all want to be able to take care of our families and spend time with our families and come home safely to our families. We all want to have a community that's safe, where our kids can thrive, where they can be educated, and where we can have a better future that we provide for the next generation. Those are things that we can unite around, and there are concrete policies that we can enact in this state and in this country that could bring us closer to that vision. But it's going to take everyday people standing together from the bottom up, because that's so much of our history demonstrates that change comes from the bottom up, whether it's the civil rights movement, the women's movement, or of course our labor movement. It takes regular people who are listening, everyday folks. We have power when we stand together and we get to know each other and we have each other's back.
I very much agree with you. I do, however, understand enough of human nature to know that most folks are out there going, what's in it for me? How do I benefit from joining this fight? I think that to answer that, we have to figure out where our shared interests are. So I'm thinking, for example, of, there was an article in one of our local newspapers recently, actually a few months ago, talking about how small businesses are benefited by local newspapers. Newspapers are in trouble. They've been in a fight. A lot of their information has been used without compensation by social media, by the internet. And so you've got newspapers that are in trouble that are folding. You've got radio stations that maybe don't have as much money as they could. But what you're doing with us, what Valley Labor Report does with WZZA, is we are benefiting one another. We're telling your story. We're giving you an opportunity to have a platform and tell your story. And at the same time, it's benefiting WZZA because we're working together. I think that if we were to figure out how we can combine our fights, sometimes we would be that much more impactful. So I'm looking at ways that we can find something that you're passionate about and that I'm passionate about and work together. And that way everyone has skin in the game and everyone is more likely to be actively involved in a more productive and positive outcome.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And an issue that comes to mind is like the environment. A lot of times people want to pit labor unions and environmentalists against one another when these struggles are so interconnected, right? I mean, obviously, we all want a safe environment. We all want clean air. We all want clean workplaces that are safe. And so, I think it's easy for folks to get divided, but we really do have a lot in common. And I think, when we show up for one another and recognize that, we all are going to have different passions. We're all going to have different, things that are pulling us in different directions. We all come from different backgrounds and perspectives. We all have our own struggles that we're going through. And I think that's worth really, reflecting on, is that the average person in this state, particularly in this state, in Alabama, in a place where things are as rough as they are, folks are struggling. They're going through a lot. And so all we can do is try to show up for one another and make ask of people that are reasonable, and see if we can just get them to move up one step closer to us, right? And every little step and build on that and go from there. But I think it is really, really important, though, that folks are able to work together and not separate themselves into silos. That, oh, well, this is my issue and that's your issue, and you do your thing, I'll do mine. We have to collaborate as much as we can. We have to cooperate as much as we can, and actually communicate with each other. And even if we don't agree on strategies or tactics, if we can find areas where we recognize we're both trying to move the ball down the field when it comes to a better society.
I very much agree. I want to say amen. I want to take a collection. I think that was very well said. Thank you so much, Adam. I am. There are so many things that you guys cover. I'd kind of like to get into the nuts and bolts of how you put your show together. How do you decide what the topic's going to be, who the guest is going to be week to week? There's so many important things to talk about. How do you decide what's going to get the attention any given week?
Well, one thing that makes it a little bit easier for us is that we do try to keep it pretty tight to union stuff, and so now you can take a very, very large view of what is a labor issue, and we do sometimes because who does everything in the country affect more than any other class? It's the working class. Working class people are affected by virtually anything, any issue that you can think of affects workers in some way. And so you can definitely take a very broad view, but we do typically, and we do that sometimes, but typically we stick pretty narrowly to a traditional kind of labor, what is a labor issue, and so that narrows it down for us quite a bit. And when we are in moments like we are today with the UAW struggle, that makes it certainly very easy as far as the programming, what to cover, what kind of guests to get. But there's always stuff going on that we can cover, and so there are some times where we have guests planned out months in advance just because that's when our calendar and their calendar works together. But we have a couple of segments that we do, Last Week in Southern Labor and Boss Watch, where all that we do is really pull from government websites, about what's going on, and give like a super kind of quick bullet list about those issues, and then the ones that we decide to dive deeper in. We definitely prioritize Southern stories, what's happening in the South, because, of course, we're a Alabama union radio program. So if it's happening in the South or it's happening in Alabama, then we're a whole lot more likely to talk about it, to try to get a guest on to talk about it. But, the driving theme of the show is that we want to educate folks about, the power that they have to make their lives better and how people are doing just that across the South and across the country. And so we try to that's basically how we and so we see what comes across our social media feeds, what comes across in the news outlets that we read, and we try to dig into things that are interesting to us and that we think that our audience would be interested in as well.
And if you haven't noticed, Jacob is pretty good at just riffing off this, and so I can chime in when necessary. But we live and breathe this stuff. We are just passionate members of the labor movement, and we've been activists for years, and so some of it's just this is what we do, this is what we believe, this is what we're about, this is what we do throughout the week, and so it kind of comes natural, and then some of it is the prep process that he outlined, and we're volunteers. We have full-time jobs outside of this. This is just something we do as a passion project. And so sometimes, it just depends on the week, on how busy we've been, and, how much we just kind of go off the dome versus, very scripted. But we just try to put out a quality product that folks, enjoy, and we try to make it accessible to folks and not talk down to folks, but really, share information and share knowledge that folks will find useful. And even if they don't like what our opinions are, they don't necessarily like our politics, hopefully they at least feel like we respect them as listeners, that, we are trying to put out something that is beneficial to folks. And hopefully that comes across.
And, it's also been helpful as we've gotten, modestly larger. We're coming up on 1 million views on YouTube, and so people are seeing us, and they are asking us to be on the show. They're pinging stories for us. And that person that I just talked about, Thomas Ricks, author of Waging a Good War, their publicist reached out to us. We had never heard of the book before, never heard of the guy before, but he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and his publicist asked us to be on the show. And so, that's been helpful in the last year as we've gotten, just a little bit larger online.
Right. It's been amazing the connections we've made with so many folks. I mean, here we are, we're talking with WZZA. We've talked with, we're on a conservative station, WVNN. We have had guests from all over the country, all over the world even, some international guests. We've had people in very high offices and also just rank and file working folks and everything in between. People with PhDs, people who write with big bylines and these big publications, but also just activists in our community. And so that's been the most satisfying thing for me in this project, is just the connections that we've made and getting to connect other people to other folks who care about making things better. And that's, if we can accomplish anything else, that's it. Just connect folks.
I've listened to your show so often, and you seem to have sensible people on there. I'm curious as to how you would respond to someone who maybe is coming from an entirely different camp with an entirely different point of view, someone who maybe is wanting to get on your show and debate with you to advocate on behalf of those fat cats who are making all the money, as opposed to the workers who are out there making the products that are selling. I'm wondering how you would react to someone who wants to get on and say, but wait, my pillow guy, wait,
Right.
I'm poor too. I need you to go fund me so I can pay my attorney because I'm being sued for all these things. How would you react to someone like that who would like to weigh in on your show?
Jacob would love it. I would probably be less inclined.
I would love to see Jacob on. I really would.
Yeah,
love to let him move from the room with him.
Yeah, I do enjoy. I enjoy debate, and how I would treat my interlocutor would really kind of depend on how much where they're coming from and how much respect I have for them as a person, right? If it's just like if it's like a conservative union member, right, who's calling in, and we have those for better and for worse, and they're asking my perspective, I'm going to be very comradely in my discussion with them, and that kind of thing, and I'm typically very respectful of anybody, if I'm talking to them, if I'm having a discussion with them on their show or mine. But depending on how belligerent they get, I would be willing to get belligerent as well, or how silly their argument is. But I and we have had a few. There's not very many times that we do that because we just, we only have so much time, right? And so we have to decide.
And we don't want to waste it with
I don't want to. How much time do I want to give to a crank who's like, oh, won't somebody think of the CEOs, right? But
right.
but it's not something that we have never done. We've had Republicans on the show to talk about. In particular, we had the fella, I don't know if you remember that anti-protest law that they tried to push in the last session.
Yeah.
We had the author of that bill on the show, and we talked to him for an hour.
It was something else.
It was something else, yeah.
Yeah. I've had some very interesting conversations with some of our elected officials from this area about some of the stances they've taken, from everything from that anti-protest to making it more difficult for someone to vote. It's absolutely ridiculous, and we've got a lot that we need to unpack in coming months about that. We've got an election year coming up next year, but I wanted to jump to something else right quick before I lose you guys. You've just mentioned that there are conservative union workers. There may be someone out there who kind of veers to the other side, who thinks, wait a minute, I'm a Republican and I'm a union worker. You're going to have your iron workers and your electricians and all these different people who may have different points of view. How do you herd the cats? You guys are union, so you're trying to get everybody to work together and for one collective goal. Yeah. So how do you make sure that everyone's voices are heard and that they keep their eye on the ball, so that we all remember we're all really members of one team How do you do that?
I don't. Adam, I'm interested in what you have to say, because Adam has had a lot more experience in that specifically, a lot more actual like real world experience. He was the staffer for the AEA in Huntsville, representing like 1,500 teachers. And, I don't know how many teachers you know in Alabama, but contrary to what you'll hear on like conservative talk radio, they're not all Marxists.
Right. Exactly.
That's true.
That. Yeah. Yeah.
I think building relationships based in trust is huge. And the labor movement is very diverse ideologically. The working class is very diverse. And so, we have folks who belong to labor unions and maybe will agree on certain aspects of, fighting for a good contract, for example, or representing their coworkers against abusive practices at work. But then when it comes to maybe social issues or cultural issues, there's a lot of, dissension. And I see that a lot in our movement, where there is, dissent and division to some degree between, maybe more progressive folks and more conservative folks, particularly when it comes to issues like race and gender, policing, criminal justice. Those issues can be very divisive. And in fact, we've kind of gotten in trouble with some union folks before. We've gotten pushback from folks for some of the stances we've taken. But we try to look at, what is best for working people, and what is a policy's impact on them. What is a politician's actions impact on them? What is, a police officer's actions impact on them? But how is a regular working class person impacted? And we stand with those people, and we try to take our stances based on that, and listen to folks and try to build respect and have good conversations around it, recognizing that it's not always going to work. But when you fight for folks, even when you disagree, you can build a lot of power and relationships there. And I had success with folks who disagree with me politically, but were willing to show up to me at that school board meeting, or willing to show up and sign up a new member, or take an action and write their legislator, even if they didn't agree with me about immigration or didn't agree with me about abortion. But we could find common ground, and through that, hopefully build, the foundation for future collaboration and see where it takes us.
You know what? That makes so much sense. And I'm thinking, because I was so frustrated, and it breaks my heart sometimes, because I think that people sometimes vote against their own self-interest because they are distracted by those red meat topics like abortion or like gay marriage or like immigration or whatever. And sometimes we forget that really that's not the focus. That's not what we should be worried about so much. That is not what is going to impact my family or my life or my home or whatever. And we need to be thinking about, voting for those things and those people who stand for us and who will actually impact our own bottom lines. And so we can't be distracted by those other topics, but they've been very effectively used by one party in particular to divide and conquer us. So we've got to remember that we stand together for a reason, and that it's important for us to continue to do so. And you've helped to make that happen by having these conversations today. I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tori. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
All right, I want to do this again, and when I'm not all matted up, so we can even maybe stay on some topics. But I think that we covered quite a bit of ground today, and I've actually been taking notes while I've been talking with you. So I'm going to be revisiting some of this. But I want to thank you for the information that you've shared. I want to thank you for what you do every week for us, and for giving us a chance to just kind of eavesdrop in on your conversations. Jacob, keep fighting the fight. Adam, keep him straight and keep him out of jail. Make sure you keep the bond money just in case you have to go fetch him out of jail sometime. I will do the same. I thank you all for listening, all of you out there who are listening to WZZA Radio, and I thank the Valley Labor Report for this conversation today. All right. Awesome. This has been Saturday in the Shoals on WZZA.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Yeah, and we do need to wrap. We've got a meeting that we are now 4 minutes late for.
What?
I'll tell you about it in a second, Jacob. You forgot. I did tell you already, but yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, we do have a 1 p.m. meeting. So we're going to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Don't forget that we have Shop Talk on Thursday mornings. Don't forget about the People's Town Hall in Huntsville on Tuesday, November 14th. Jacob, you got anything else before we wrap?
Nope, that's it. See you next week, folks.